My question hung in the air. Your voice sounds familiar. I remember you, but I forgot your name. Helena finally said with trepidation. Really? I said in disbelief, a little hurt echoing in my voice. Well, I guess I was the one who was always talking, so it is understandable. I see you became a legionnaire like you wanted, and you became a hound, she said with some vitriol. Are my companions dead? Did she think I was gloating by talking to her? That was not my intention. I looked over at the other legionnaire. I couldn't lie as the blood flowed freely from the shoulder wound in her missing hand. Her heart was still pumping out blood. The other legionnaire will be dead soon. The mage has been incapacitated, but still breathes. She surprised me with her invisibility and almost got me. Okay, it did sound like I was gloating. Sylph is dead? Hearing the pained emotion in her voice, and knowing the other legionnaire's name, made me twinge with guilt. They were clearly close, either friends or lovers. Helena seemed to deflate, facing the inevitable, and she stopped trying to rub the film from her eyes. You really needed to use water. If you are a hound, why haven't you killed Celine? Are you to bring Mage Celine back alive then? There was some hope in her words that her charge might live, but she appeared resigned to her own fate. I quickly turned over my response in my mind, needing to come to a decision. This all felt as wrong to my core as being sent to murder children in their sleep. I finally asked, to assuage my guilt. I am curious. What did the mage do to become a traitor to the Empire? Traitor! She spat the word in disgust, anger flaring. She was the one betrayed. She was told orc pathfinders killed her parents, and she was being sent to the war front to fight the Eisenheim elves. She should have been raised to a baroness and taken over her family's estate. Duke Octavian wants to control her family's gold and silver mines. Her response made me pause. I felt like I owed Helena something for teaching and getting me through legionnaire training. Without her lessons, I might have fallen below the cut and been exiled to the regular army. I decided to try to convince her to flee and forget about the mage, but if I let Sylph die, her friend or lover, she might seek revenge against me in the future. Now that Duke Octavian was brought into the equation, it gave me further pause. He was an enemy of Castile, and therefore myself. I moved closer to Sylph to stop the wrist from bleeding further by wrapping it tightly. I continued the conversation as I worked. There are orc pathfinders within the Empire. I have fought them. Helena laughed, her tone turning dark. The pathfinders only kill to achieve a purpose, hound. You should know that Baron and Baroness Greco had no value to the Bhutan Caliphate. Duke Octavian wants to control the gold and silver mines on their lands, and First Citizen Celine is the only remaining Greco in the line of succession. He staged their murder, and you hounds confirmed the farce. She spat on the ground. Celine should be raised to Baroness, and instead was being sent to fight the elves with just 2 legionnaires instead of her family's entire household guard. She would have been dead within the week. I stood as the bleeding stopped, and the shoulder wound had clotted on its own. I could tell Helena believed what she was saying, and knowing Duke Octavian, it was probably the truth. I didn't understand why the only remaining member of a family would be ordered to fight, especially a first citizen. If she is a first citizen, how can she be forced to fight? Where have you been, hound? Helena spat angrily, getting bolder as the conversation extended. The elves have landed, and the Barteradians are surging from the south toward Maca. They have formed an alliance to take the Eastern Empire. The Emperor has ordered every battle-trained mage to the front. My mind raced, and I cursed Centurion Sergius for keeping me in the dark. When did this happen? I asked, puzzled. 8.5 days ago. Helena relaxed her defensive stance and loosened her grip on her staff. I stepped back anyway, as she might be trying to lure me into a false sense of security. So she is a traitor for fleeing the Empire in its hour of need, I said evenly. What would you have done if you buried your parents, and the next day an appointed steward arrives to handle your estate while you are sent with just a fraction of your household guard to fight an elven invasion? Selena isn't even a war mage. The only thing she has killed in her 25 years is a bottle of wine, Helena said harshly. I took the question seriously, formulating a truthful response. It was the politics of the Empire as I had come to know them. I would have taken all my gold and fled the Empire. Helena grasped at the thread. Is that what you want? The gold? We dropped our packs when we rushed you. There are 300 in gold and silver and more in jewelry. I stepped back to look, and with my night vision goggles, I could see the packs in the distance. I remembered the thuds before they rushed my position. My mind played with options as my conscience battled itself. Finally, I pulled one of the paralytic arrows and shot Helena in the leg. She started cursing me, but the poison quickly silenced her to only gibberish as her muscles relaxed, and she could only gurgle her obscenities at me. When you wake up, I hope you can forgive me. I bound blindfolded and gagged her while feeling the hatred pouring off her. I forced 2 oblivion pills down her throat to force her into unconsciousness. I checked on Sylph. Barely alive and unconscious. I used the foul, simple orc potions to ensure the neck wound was closed, and a second to reattach the hand, smearing the foul brew on the exposed flesh, then releasing the tourniquet. Cracking the seal had let the putrid odor permeate the air, and I didn't think I would ever be able to consume this orc brew willingly. The tendons and bone would need a mage or greater healing potion to make the hand functional again. I then bound, blindfolded, and gagged her as well after forcing 2 oblivion pills into her. Was I making a mistake? Before turning to my other problem, I took time to wash Helena's eyes with cold water and used a 3rd orc potion, pouring it on the arrow wound. When I had enough aether, I pulled Magebane from my space. I channeled aether into the blade, and the intricate relief work of spiders filled with the ether toxin. Even with her invisibility, I could clearly see the mage in my space. I removed First Citizen Selenine, facing away from me. The mage was still invisible as I cut into her thigh. She squealed in pained surprise as she became visible with my goggles, and collapsed holding the fresh wound. I could tell the woman was reaching for her ether and was disoriented and confused when she couldn't utilize it. The poison worked fast and made using aether like trying to sail a ship in a hurricane. Realizing the futility, she reached for her dagger, but I was already behind her, sweeping her legs, forcing her to the ground, and pinning her with my body weight. She cursed and struggled with futility as I bound, blindfolded, and gagged her. She didn't give up. She continued to struggle, but it would do her no good. I then sat down and wrote in my notebook. I caught the mage, killed 1 legionnaire, and the other legionnaire fled. The first citizen told me the elves have invaded. Should I bring her to you so she can be sent to fight the elves as intended? I wasn't expecting a quick response, so I checked on Rusty and fed him while I waited for morning and a reply. The Magebane toxin wore off in an hour, so I continued to dose her, not knowing what spell forms she had. Maybe the mage thought I was torturing her with the small cuts, but it couldn't be helped until I made a final decision on her fate. I went through their 3 packs as I waited, keeping a close eye on my prisoners. Inside, I found some food, inadequate camping supplies, and a lot of coins, definitely more than 300 gold. Finally, Centurion Sergius sent me a message. Excellent work, Hound. Kill her, and bring the traitor's ring, amulet, and any other artifacts you found to Brappo. Hercule will take them from there to me. I watched as the words scrawled across the page, and when they stopped, I asked again, writing, "Have the elves invaded? Should I pursue the other legionnaire?" I didn't have to wait long before he responded, "Yes, the elves landed a week ago, and the Barteradians surged across the eastern border. The Empire spent all winter preparing. They have not advanced far. Forget the legionnaire. She is of no consequence. Bring the artifacts and burn the mage's body." I waited for more, frustrated, but no other words appeared on the page. I knew he wanted the body burned so he could confirm the death of the mage. Relief flooded me as I wouldn't have to kill Helena or take her with me. Maybe I wouldn't have to kill the mage either. I spent the morning setting up a pyre and started a fire to burn to just ashes. I searched Celine for artifacts, removing her ring, amulet, and a runic dagger. My experienced eye told me the perfect gold ring was a dungeon artifact, but the amulet and dagger were artificed by hand. Selena struggled as I searched inside her clothes, but I was quick about it, and only found a small secret purse with a few gold coins that I returned where I found it. "Don't worry, Mage Celine, When you wake up again, all will be well. You will not be dining with Pluto today. I forced 2 oblivion pills into her mouth and held her jaw closed until they dissolved and took effect. I returned the sleeping Selene to my dimensional space, and I waited for an hour before I wrote in the message-sending book, "The mage has been burned. Nothing remains." A response came back immediately, as he had clearly been waiting for my words. "Good work, Hound. Get the artifacts to Hercule." So, my dimensional space did fool him. It was also clear that Helena was correct, and they only cared about the death of the last of the Greco line. I stepped on the coals and spread the ash while I waited for Helena and Sylph to wake. It was midday when Helena woke first. She jolted awake, the blindfold and gag now gone. She took in her surroundings. Her legionnaire companion was on the ground, curled into a ball, and the clear pile of ash in the shape of a body was visible. "I am sorry, but I was ordered to burn the mage. I used alchemist's flash powder, and she did not suffer." I needed Helena to think the mage was dead in case a truth-seeker questioned her. Helena's face had sorrow, and her vision was fixed on her legionnaire companion. "Am I next, then?" "No. I owe you for your past kindness. My name is Eric." I reminded Helena of my name since she had forgotten. I tossed one of the packs on the ground near her head. "Run, Helena. I was not ordered to kill the legionnaires. Get as far from the Empire as you can. I hear the capital of the Duchy of Manche is nice this time of year." I stressed the location, as that was where Castile and her loyal legionnaires were headed. Helena's eyes held no love for me, but I hoped that would change once she freed herself and found her companion alive. I couldn't risk having her know Mage Selene was alive, though. Helena was not done with me. She needed to curse me one more time before I escaped earshot. "You killed good people, Eric. Sylvia and Selene didn't deserve to die for another man's greed. The Empire is rotten and eating itself alive even as its enemies knock on its door." I heard her spit in my direction, but ignored it and focused on my task of getting Rusty ready. I told myself I couldn't save everyone but could still try. It would be 3 days of traveling north to reach Brapo, but it would also take me into the region where the owlbear had been attacked, so I would proceed cautiously. My dimensional space was also getting crowded. Although I definitely had the free space, at this rate I was becoming an ark for people who were supposed to be dead. Centurion Sergius might still have Selen's sample in his blood compass, as he had confirmed her death only a few hours ago. So she would be in residence for a while. I swung up onto Rusty's back and gave Helena some parting words. "Get your friend to a healer, but don't get discovered." Her head whipped to Sylvia, dumbfounded. I started trotting north, not looking back. I had no question that I had done the right thing, but it felt like I was cornering myself. What was I going to do? Put every innocent person I was ordered to kill in my dimensional space. I took my time riding north, in no rush to reach Brapo. I camped in an ancient overgrown stone structure. My earthspeak told me the cellar had filled with debris over time. A modest stash of silver coins was down there, but I was not motivated to dig through a few feet of centuries-old detritus, and it was just outside the range of my dimensional space. Rusty was happy to get a full meal of grain and apples, as foraging for grass was limited. I was pretty low on horse grain and would have to get some from a village on the way. At sunset, I had no messages from my centurion and settled in for an uneasy night of short naps. I had gotten enough rest by midnight, and the dry, cold air made me use Raelia's thermal stone for heat, which Rusty also appreciated, but he was not house-trained like Ginger, pissing voluminous urine in our shelter. When morning came, I found a disturbing new message in the book. "The Orc war fleet entered Kraken Bay last night. Race to your lookout and report their movements." My blood chilled a little. It was happening as many had predicted. The Orcs were using the war in the east to press their claims here in the west. I started asking questions in the notebook. How many ships? Is the Empire sending soldiers? Where are they landing? No responses appeared on the pages, and I closed it in disgust. I was being kept in the dark, and it was a low priority for Sergius to keep a hound sentry informed. Kraken Bay is 300 miles long from north to south, and a third that wide at some points. It is more like a massive inlet sea than a bay. At the very southern end of the bay, Varval was the closest city. If the Orcs were going to carve off a chunk of the Empire, that would be their target. I had no illusions of being able to stop an armada. I rode northwest, and was no longer headed for Brapo. I reached the coast and thought I was south of my lookout. I camped in the rocky terrain, not risking an injury to Rusty in the dark. Neptune's tier was hidden behind the clouds this evening, and the ridgeline overlooking the bay was unforgiving. I turned the anchor stone in my hands again after sunset. Still nothing from Xina. Reluctantly, I put the stone away. I scanned the waters every hour and cursed when the specks of light in the distance confirmed the orc fleet's arrival far to the north. With my spyglass, I counted 37 ships, but there could have been more. I scribbled in the notebook. 37 large ships sighted, all sailing south. It wasn't until an hour after sunrise that my book had a response written in it. Follow and shadow the fleet and continue to report. That was it. I didn't know how far south of my lookout I was, but guessed about a dozen miles. The Armada was bravely sailing through the center of the bay as if daring anyone to challenge it. I suspected the Empire had nothing to stop it. The high rocky ridge was too dangerous to ride along, so I was going to have to descend into the forest, ride south, and then climb the ridgeline again to track them. The good thing was I could ride much faster than the fleet could sail. I led Rusty down the slope, and we raced through the forest for 3 hours before climbing again. I was ahead of the fleet and scanned them again, trying to count them in the light of day. I didn't have the spyglass stand, so it was difficult to hold steady to get an accurate count. I ended up with 38 this time, and wrote it in the message-sending book. I still had no more orders from the Centurion. I wondered what the Empire's response to the Orc Armada was going to be. We descended the slope again, and this time I planned to run Rusty for only 2 hours before spotting the fleet again. Rusty sensed something was wrong long before I did. He slowed, resisting my urging to continue and dancing in place. He was trying to warn me of something. I didn't see anything, so I dismounted to use Earth Speak. As my feet hit the ground, I didn't even need to use Earth Speak to feel the vibrations. My Earth pulse returned a horrific image, and I rolled away, releasing the reins, and yelled, "Rusty, run!" Rusty couldn't process the shouted command quickly enough, as the earth softened under him, and then erupted up under him. A massive ant-like head seized his neck while massive arms ending in 4 dangerous claws racked his body. Rusty's body was eviscerated, and his internals spread across the ground. The bipedal insect-like creature extracted itself from the ground while its jaws finished decapitating poor Rusty. It had been lying in wait nearby, and moved under the ground to intercept us. By the dangerous-looking claws, I assumed this was the creature that had forced the owlbear to flee its hibernation. What concerned me was in all the lessons from Hearn and all my bestiaries in my dreamscape. I still had no idea what I was facing. Whatever you are going to be dead soon for killing Rusty. The 10-foot monstrosity turned to my voice. Its bug-like eyes focused on me while its mandibles dripped with Rusty's blood. Its mouth moved erratically as it pulled flesh and blood into its mouth. I pulled the black spear to my hand and announced, "Let's dance, you overgrown cockroach." The creature's mandibles helped its grotesque maw slurp up Rusty's viscera. With the creature standing over 10 feet tall and almost as wide, I was not going to be able to move a large volume. My dimensional space was crowded, so I settled on a decent-sized mass, targeting the head and getting its brain. Its clawed arm reached down, pulled up an intestine, and sucked it into its mouth like slurping spaghetti. I couldn't take it anymore, and moved in to slay the horror. Its claw was lightning quick, but I never got close enough for it to reach me as I removed part of its brain. It had a stronger resistance than I expected, but I succeeded in the brief tug-of-war, and the claw slowed, confused. "You're dead and just don't know it yet," I boasted with a grim smile, thinking my revenge for Rusty was complete. One of the eyes went wild as I smirked, thinking I had succeeded, but then it lunged at me. I pivoted and interposed the black spear. The spear pierced easily and sunk deep into the carapace, but when the creature turned to face me, the shaft was ripped from my hand before I could extract it. Opening some distance, I swore, "Dragon shit, why aren't you dead?" The creature was having difficulty moving as I drew my black blade. The only thing I could think of was that I hadn't removed enough of the brain. Anatomy was not part of my hound training. Not that this creature struck any chord of familiarity from Hearn's lessons. It walked disjointedly toward me, the black spear's shaft swinging like a new appendage. The massive arms, each tipped with 4 impressive claws, swung at me clumsily as I parried and retreated. The clang of the dark blade against its shell was not a good sign. Orc's torment couldn't penetrate the hard shell as easily as the black spear. If it hadn't been weakened and slowed by the removal of part of its brain, I might have been in trouble. It didn't want to let me go, so I drew it further away, hoping the blue blood leaking down the spear shaft would drain its life enough to kill it. The creature was relentless as we danced in the woods. It finally seemed to notice the spear and yanked it free with a clawed hand. It tried to snap the shaft in anger, and I was shocked when it bowed slightly before rebounding. After its failure to destroy the weapon, it furiously tossed away the weapon. I was unhappy to note that the hole left behind quickly congealed with blue blood, stopping its bleeding. It did give me time to circle and retrieve the discarded black spear. The shaft was sticky with blue blood, but this weapon was capable of cutting the creature's hard shell. It once again located me and continued in its pursuit for dessert. The spear was immediately effective as a slashing cut removed one of its claws, surprising us both. If it had an intact brain, it might have been smart enough to run. Instead, I was able to remove more claws and poke shallow holes with the spear. The entire battle took over an hour, the beast having an impressive constitution, showering the forest floor with splatters of blue blood. I could have ended it sooner as my Aether recovered enough for my dimensional surgery trick, but I was taking a perverse pleasure in tormenting the creature for killing Rusty. When it did fall, I confirmed its death with the spear and immediately used the essence collector. The azure smoke was thick as it coalesced into a sphere. Unsurprisingly, an apex essence had formed, and its dark brown and gray swirls were a welcome sight. As my adrenaline faded, I was able to mourn Rusty's death. I should have trusted his instincts and run as soon as he sensed something was wrong. Standing over the mutilated horse, I apologized. "Damn it, Rusty. I'm sorry I let you down. You were a fine steed, and I thank you for your service." I closed his eyes. I drank from my canteen to replenish my fluids as I moved to climb the ridge to check on the orc fleet. Being on foot allowed me to use my Earth Speak spell form continuously, so at least I won't be surprised again. The orc fleet had moved, and I counted 38 ships again. I wrote in my notebook, "Orc fleet is about 30 miles south of my lookout and still sailing with 38 ships. I lost my mount to a monstrosity in the woods, and I am on foot and healing from an injury." I added the injury detail in hopes I wouldn't have to continue following the armada. Centurion Sergius must have had the notebook open as the response was nearly immediate. "Continue following the fleet. Hound Corvus is 40 miles south of you. Join up with him and track the fleet together." The bastard didn't even ask me if I was okay or what had killed Rusty. Just get back to work. I had been ready to draw a picture in the book in hopes of learning what the creature was. Instead of following the fleet, I sat on the ridge and ate a burrito in mild protest. It was frustrating not knowing what was happening in the eastern part of the Empire. I was also being used as a tool by Centurion Sergius for his personal ambitions. It wouldn't be long before I couldn't escape doing despicable things. I checked, and the fleet was well south of me, so I would have to get moving soon to catch up. Reluctantly, I stood and started to make my way slowly on the rocky ridgeline. Using my Earth Speak, I found another concealed lookout about 5 miles further down the coast. It smelled foul, and a pool of water had rotted everything inside. It looked like the back of the cave had a clogged drain, and this post had not been manned in decades. Leaving the cave, I turned the spyglass on the fleet. They were still a dozen miles offshore, but I was certain one of the ships had broken away from the armada and was angling toward my shore. I moved to the other side of the ridge to hide my movements as I tried to determine where the ship might land. It was still angling south, and after hours of its slow approach, it entered a small bay ahead of me. I raced to get a good vantage point to spy from while remaining concealed. Nestled in the shadow of a rock crevice, I retrieved my spyglass and studied the ship. The sails had been drawn down, and they had anchored the ship 200 yards from shore. The decks were busy with orc sailors and what? A large, bald, gray-skinned man was moving crates. At first, I thought the shirtless Goliath was Maveth, but getting a closer look, I saw that it was not him, and relief flooded me. 2 other Goliaths were on deck, moving crates to boats to be lowered. At first, it saddened me to see the Goliaths had allied with the orcs, but then an orc bashed one of the Goliaths with a club for no reason I could discern. A second and third strike finished the harsh discipline. Tattooed orcs joined the sailors on deck as they prepared the 2 rowboats. The Goliaths served as rowers, and 9 tattooed orcs entered the boats. I assumed this was an orc pathfinder squad by their armor and weapons. There was nothing of importance nearby, so setting them ashore here made no sense. My best guess was they were to serve as a lookout for a Tellian fleet coming behind them and trapping them in the bay. But as far as I knew, the Tellian Empire only had a handful of warships. The 2 rowboats landed, and the Goliaths began to unload the crates far up the shore. At least the Pathfinders were not as cruel as the sailors to the Goliaths. I wrote in my book, the orcs have set a Pathfinder team ashore about 25 miles north of Corvia's position. Counting 9, I was half expecting Centurion Sergius to order me to kill the entire squad. Thankfully, he did not when he responded an hour later. They are here to hunt hounds, avoid them, circle around and connect with Corvus, move to the inlet of the Varveo River and see what the Warfleet is doing there. 2 orc pathfinders started climbing the ridge, and I started to pulse Earth speak and consumed the Apex Earth essence, extending my range further by a few feet. They were going to cut off my route south, but there were only 2 of them. I continued to watch, waiting for complete darkness to move out of my concealment. Surprisingly, the rowboats returned and began to load for a second trip, as a 4th Goliath worked the hoists on deck to lower more crates. It appeared the orcs were setting up a permanent station. My Earth speak revealed the approach of one of the pathfinders scouting above me. He shouldn't be able to see into my dark crevice. As the sun set, I switched to my night vision goggles and waited for an opportunity to slip away. It didn't come as the spotter settled in above me under the cover of some rock formations. The orc yelled something in Orcish above me, and a 3rd orc climbed up to take watch from another viewpoint. I was not going to be able to sneak away, and Neptune's tear was going to be bright tonight with the perfectly clear sky. I started to slide and hug the rocks as I moved quietly back. With Earth Speak's range of over 40 feet, I could see the Pathfinder, but he couldn't see me. Rather than risk an alarm, I got behind him and took his head, bottoming out my ether, but improved my odds of leaving unnoticed. Just 1 more sentry, and I should be able to make it down the ridge and into the woods unnoticed. With the Aether Collector generating strong etheric blue light, I couldn't risk using it at night. I could wait for my ether to replenish and take the entire body, but right now, I was hoping to escape unnoticed. My night vision goggles failed to reveal the next sentry, who remained beyond my Earth Speak's range. Maybe he was scouting down into the woods already. I moved to a higher position and got a better view of the beach. The Goliaths were unloading the second shipment of crates under the light of the moon, and I guessed there was a cave in the bay below where they disappeared into the cliff face. I began to scuttle over the top of the ridge, and a heavy arrow thudded into my hip. I kept in a scream as I moved lower for cover. The 3rd orc across the bay had spotted me and was alerting his companions below with yells in his language. Of course, the orcs had a way to see me in the dark. Otherwise, they wouldn't make good night sentries. I could hear the scrambling below and more orcs coming to join my penthouse party. At least the ship was anchored 200 yards from shore, and I didn't see any additional small boats coming from the ship. Short clips of the orc language rang out in the night as I worked the arrow out and used Purify Self to cleanse the orc's poison before healing the wound. The poison was a type of slow-working paralytic, causing my muscles to contract. My ether had barely recovered, and now I was empty again. This, being my 3rd fight in less than a day, just reinforced my current string of bad luck. I had 8 orcs remaining, and they all had an idea of where I was. I couldn't let them encircle me and close in. I needed to move while they thought I was incapacitated. I dashed along an exposed summit, hearing an arrow strike and shatter on a rock nearby. I got around a large stone to find a surprised orc with a bow. In quick motion, my hound dagger was in my hand as I tackled him, riding him to the ground. The bastard was strong, but he wasn't prepared for a dagger being shoved under his chin. I rolled away, yanking the blade free to cause as much damage as possible. Even though I reached the brain, in a world with magical healing, you needed to make sure you did sufficient damage so they couldn't be healed by others. I also knew the Pathfinders carried lesser healing potions. I reached the rise and raced down the rocky slope into the forest. The orc Pathfinders were not giving up as stones clattered behind me, as they descended in a run as well, communicating with each other in short phrases as they spread out. After a mile of sprinting among the trees, I squatted behind a large oak to listen. The Pathfinders had slowed and gone silent as well. I thought racing recklessly through the woods at night could be dangerous with the other horrors out here, but if I could get enough aether, Earth Speak would be invaluable right now. I was using most of the aether I was recovering to keep the night vision goggles working. I could see 2 orcs coming toward me, scanning the woods, and I silently drew Orc's Torment, letting them come to me. As they passed my tree, I took the one on the left. He only had his bow in hand, and he tried to roll away. My blade bit deep into his hip, and the pain from the moderate cut surprised him. He unleashed a pained wail. I did not have a lot of time before the remaining orcs would be closing in. The other orc had discarded his bow and drew a short sword, rushing me. I threw my dagger at him to slow him down, not expecting it to kill him as I heard it thud into his body. I turned to finish the other crippled orc who tried to roll away. I scored a slash on his thigh, and then pierced his unprotected groin. His trembling hands were fumbling with his belt, and my final slash was across his face, crunching bone and digging deep, silencing his wails. I turned quickly on the other orc, to find him struggling with the dagger in his throat. I couldn't tell if my luck was terrible today or great, as he must have ducked to avoid the projectile, only to take it in the throat. The orc's bane finished off my 4th orc, and I sought cover as an arrow thudded near my feet. The odds were still not in my favor, being 5-1. But I decided finishing off the Pathfinders was the best course of action for my survival. I was going to start with this annoying archer. Once I recovered a little aether. The Pathfinders didn't come immediately, and I assumed the others had taken longer to climb up from the beach. That, or they were not coming at all. I retreated to a defensible Y-shaped tree formation and pulled out my bow and quiver. The paralytic arrows were probably best for the encounter, but I only had 3 remaining. Every moment allowed me to recover more aether for Air Shield and Earth Speak, but I was not going to be able to recover enough either for another instant kill. The ether channeling ring doubled my aether recovery speed, and I was glad for it. Even then, there is never enough. I was thankful to have eliminated 4 of the Pathfinders, but without the element of surprise, my odds were still not looking good. I hadn't had time to figure it out, but I pulled out Celine's amulet. She had deflected my arrow with an ether shield, so I assumed this was an ether shield amulet. Using it in the middle of a fight was probably not smart, and I was not sure how it worked. Hopefully, I just needed to charge it with aether and put it around my neck. The second negative was that the blue flash would highlight my location to everyone within sight if it activated. I pulled it around my neck and channeled aether into it. It was a greedy artifact, taking more aether than I wanted to give it at the moment. An owl's call cut the air, and my focus snapped to the direction. That was not an owl I was familiar with. Constantine and Hearn had a competition of bird calls, and the 3 owls they mimicked sounded nothing like the cadence and tone of this one. My goggles didn't see anything, and that uneasy feeling began to spread through me, some sixth sense that told of impending danger. A second bird call from my left told me it was Pathfinders. That was a swallow, but they were only active during the day. Not wanting to waste either, but having no choice, I sent out a pulse of Earth Speak. There was a Pathfinder not 30 feet from me. He was either invisible or had camouflage that fooled the goggles. I was fortunate Earth Speak was not fooled, but it also meant the other Pathfinders were similarly stealthed. Gritting my teeth as my aether got dangerously low, I pulsed twice more as the Pathfinder approached. Just as he was within 10 feet, I cursed as another Pathfinder entered my spellform's detection range behind me. I chose the spear as my weapon, leaving the black blade and bow leaning against the tree. Trusting Earth Speak, I performed an upward slash as I left my cover. I met a modicum of resistance, but it barely slowed the spear. The orc was split open from groin to neck. His cleanly parted black leathers opened to release a flood of his intestines. I flicked the spear tip through the vocal cords to keep him relatively silent. The twang of multiple bows echoed in the night, and the either shield flashed as I dove for cover. The amulet had just saved me from a painful lesson. 2 Pathfinders were in bow range on the same side. If my count was correct, there were 4 orcs remaining. I could only see one taking cover 30 feet away. I couldn't remain still, and rushed towards my only visible target, spear in one hand and the black blade in my other. Seeing my approach, the orc stood and drew back his bow, perhaps thinking my either shield was expended. When his arrow shattered in front of me, and I used the same air shield to pivot past him, he was too slow to get his guard up. I drove the spear into his sternum, trusting it would penetrate his armor. The spear easily slid through the leather covering his chest and out his back. Given the way he dropped, I guessed I'd severed his spine. An arrow passed by my face, loosed by the second orc bowman now visible to my right behind cover. I released my grip on the spear, having no time to extract it as distant shouts told me the remaining 2 orcs were approaching. I rushed the other Pathfinder archer and took cover behind a tree when she leveled her bow. She was screaming urgently in Orcish at her companions, and I could guess what she was saying. An arrow thudded into the tree I was hiding behind, and I scanned the woods, not seeing the other orcs, but knowing they were there. I judged I had about 4 uses of earth speak left or 1 air shield. I reached into my belt and started tossing sets of 3 pellets in the direction of the oncoming orcs. If they were invisible or camouflaged, the disturbance of the smoke would tell me where they were. Then I tossed the blinding pellets at the archer 20 feet away. She must have thought it was just smoke pellets and yelled for what I assumed was an urgent request for help, as her vision was blurred. I darted and closed on the blinded female Pathfinder. She drew her blade and used her bow defensively. I didn't have time to waste, so I let her parry with the bow blindly, sliding the blade into her hand. Fingers hit the forest floor, with a blood-curdling scream of pain as the orc-bane blade did its work. I silenced the scream by stabbing her in the throat and taking cover. 2 swirls of smoke showed me the location of the charging Pathfinders, both massive specimens of orcs. The Pathfinder groups always came from the same clan or family, so I may have just killed a daughter or wife of one of these males. They stopped their rush and stood as their eyes traveled over the carnage. These 2 had come from the direction I had been fleeing in. They must have tried to get ahead of me to ambush me. They hadn't expected me to fight. I was shocked when their camouflage dropped. They looked at their 2 dead companions and would have passed at least 1 other as they reached me. "Hound, do not hide. Face me." The larger one spoke in broken Tellian. "You kill much of what I lived for tonight. Show me you are not afraid to face me with blades." I heard my heart beating in my ears, and my body was covered in sweat from my night's work. They knew where I was, and both had a long blade in one hand and a short blade in the other. "There are 2 of you, and just 1 of me," I finally stated in Tellian. The larger one's face was hardened in anger, and the other Pathfinder behind also looked menacing. "I, Raka, of Clan Sun Shadow, I swear to fight you alone." He turned and nodded to his companion, who reluctantly took his bow off his back, laid it on the ground, and started taking steps back. "You killed 2 of my sons and my niece tonight, Hound. Fight me and show me the hounds have honor." I stepped slowly and cautiously from behind the tree. He wasn't affected by either of the pellets, but the other one, backing away, clearly inhaled, and was fighting back, sneezing while his nose dribbled constant snot. "Eric of House Marco," I introduced myself. "I am not familiar with your code of honor. How does it work?" In fact, I did know a little from the books I had taken in Telha and studied in my dreamscape. The problem I was having was their code of honor did not extend to other races, only to other orcs. "If I have to explain what honor is, then you do not have any," he stated tersely. He then shifted his stance. "My mouth speaks my anger at the pain of my loss." He bowed his head momentarily. "Honor is gained by defeating a worthy opponent without guile, only strength and skill." I was confused and said, "But you are a Pathfinder, and I am a hound. Is that not what we do? Use guile to kill our enemies?" He exhaled sharply and tried again like he was explaining to a child. "I do not wish to explain further. My heart calls for vengeance. Use your tricks if you must, but no, you will not gain my honor if you do." He started to close the distance on me. I think he was trying to guilt me into not using my spell forms, pellets, and whatever other tricks I had. I pulsed Earth Speak to confirm there was nothing I was unaware of and didn't see anything on his part. I slid my feet into a defensive stance, pulled my new runic dagger from Celine, and we danced. The clang of our blades echoed in the woods. We were both testing each other to start, And while he held the strength advantage, I was superior to him in all other physical aspects. He quickly realized he was disadvantaged and broke the engagement for a moment. He yelled disheartened to his companion Intellian, "Get to the ship. I will delay him." The spectating orc looked confused. "Go!" the leader yelled at him. "Tell them tonight I fell to Eric of House Marco." The other orc dashed away, and Reka did his best to occupy me. He didn't realize I wielded an orcsbane blade, and although my first cut across his forearm was minor, he suddenly had trouble holding his sword. "An orcbane," he said through the pain. "I didn't know any had survived." I didn't have time for dialogue as I wanted to catch up to the runner. In the next series of exchanges, I tricked him with a feint and sliced through his padded leggings deep into his thigh. Blood quickly soaked his leggings, and he was only stalling for time now. I was waiting for him to reach for a potion to take advantage of the action, but he never did, just continued defending. I bit back my reluctance to use ether and created an air shield, blocking his defensive swing. He was surprised as my blade was stopped, and I cut deep into the side of his neck. I turned, pivoted, and cut deep into the other side, dislodging his head to make sure he didn't survive. I guessed I had no honor. I raced after the fleeing orc, grabbing the black spear on the way by. My bow and quiver were in the wrong direction, but I had spare bows anyway. I raced through the dark woods, trying to catch up to him. He only had a few minutes of a head start, but it was not far to the rise. I crested the rise looking for him, and could see him scrambling down the rocks toward the boats and waking the 4 Goliaths with yells as he did so. I was assuming he was telling them to get the boats ready, and I was not going to catch him or confront 4 Goliaths. I watched from the top of the ridge as he reached the boats using gestures pointing back at me, and then at the ship anchored in the bay. I was shocked by what happened next. The Goliaths started pushing one of the boats into the water, but one stopped, grabbed an oar, and slammed it into the back of the Pathfinder's head. The Pathfinder, to his credit, stumbled a short distance but remained standing. That didn't last long as the other 3 Goliaths joined their companion in beating the disoriented orc. When he was obviously dead, the Goliaths raced into the cave. I couldn't see from my vantage. I watched on in fascination as they exited with bags of supplies and started climbing the bluff toward me. Had they seen me and were fleeing to me for protection, or just taking the opportunity to gain their freedom? I waited for the 4 gray-skinned men, curious of their intentions. I watched impassively, with the cold, salty breeze blowing over me, as the Goliaths scrambled up the ridge. The Pathfinder on the beach was definitely dead, his body twisted, so I had no reason to descend. The Goliaths could not see well in the dark, so I moved to intercept them on their likely path of ascent. I was curious and hoped to question them for a little information. As they got closer, I could see a large anklet on each of them, clicking against rocks as they climbed. One of the Goliaths was clearly female. I hadn't been able to tell at a distance because they were all so thin. I removed the night vision goggles to show my face and get my night sight in the light of Neptune's tear. The first one reached me, grunting and breathing heavily as he climbed the final distance, and paused in shock as I crouched on a rock above their path. The other 3 joined him, nervous at my sudden appearance, and the first one said something in the orc tongue that sounded like French to me. I responded calmly in Tellian, no weapons in hand. "I am a hound of the Empire. Does the ship have any more longboats?" They all looked at each other, confused. Of course, this group didn't speak Tellian. That was just my luck. The apparent leader tried again, this time in the language of the stone giants. I only recognized it because Mavaith had used it to talk to the manticore. I sighed as it looked like we were not going to be able to communicate. I had decided to let them run to freedom. Before I did so, I tried the only other language on Dazia I knew. In Elvish, I asked again, "Does the ship have more boats to row ashore?" My vocabulary was not as extensive in the Elvish tongue, and I had to speak slowly as I recalled the words. I definitely needed more practice with the language, and Realia's image flashed in my head, frowning at my butchering of her language. The only female in the group stepped bravely forward. Her voice was cracked, harsh, and sounded exhausted as she spoke in Elvish. "No, only the 2 on the beach. They will have to swim to shore if they want to chase us. Are all the Pathfinders dead? As dead as the one on the beach? Her Elvish was as rough as mine, but she was more confident in her words." I nodded slowly as that was good news. I affirmed the deaths of the others to relieve the Goliaths. "Yes, I killed them all. Do not worry, I will not stop you from running. I am a hound of the Empire, and I have a Goliath I count as a friend. He lives in Sobral City. Do you know a Goliath named Mavith? I asked offhandedly. The female talked with the three, and they relaxed, realizing I would not stop or attack them. I heard Mavith's name being passed around as they talked. The female finally answered me. None of us know a Mavith. It's not a common name among the clans. We are from Stone Mountain Island, taken from the villages of Emerald Harbor and Granite Hollow a long time ago. You are a long way from home. I stated the obvious. I was not good at idle conversation. The female replied harshly. We were taken young by orc slavers against our will. Her hard tone had the males tense until she calmed them down with words, explaining the conversation. I am Eric, I said, introducing myself. I stood from my squat and jumped down so I would not lord over them from above. I still kept my distance. I was trying to remember the name of Zorana's friend, who had been taken in front of Mavith. It finally clicked in my memory. Are many Goliath slaves in the Bhutan Caliphate? Is there one called Myra among them? The woman relayed the name and question to the others, and this led to a rapid conversation. They were also sneaking glances down at the moored ship out in the bay, eager to run. Finally the woman responded, My name is Thelna. This is Egloth, Arhan, and Elamith. Egloth knows of a Goliath woman called Myra. She was purchased by Warlord Rook 10 years ago from the pirate slavers, but Myra is a common name among our people. It was too much to hope for, but I asked anyway. Ask him if this Myra ever mentioned a friend named Zorana. She would have been killed when Myra was captured on a beach. This got an intense conversation going, and the males looked more impatient to start their flight. The slow, drawn-out Elvish we were speaking took time. I heard Zorana and Myra's names a few times before Thelna addressed me again. Yes, there was a Zorana who arrived with Myra in the slave pens in Harbet. They were a bolt of icy cold went down my spine. I stopped her immediately, the revelation causing me to get lightheaded. Zorana is alive. Where is she? I waited impatiently as Thelna talked to the others again. Finally, she returned her attention to me. Egloth does not know if she is still alive. He last saw her 9 years ago when she and Myra were taken to Warlord Rook's estate. My head was spinning. I needed to tell Mavith, but couldn't abandon my post. I should probably do it anyway, bored with myself, getting agitated, and deciding on a plan of action. The 4 Goliaths were cautious as they could see my agitation as I thought. I looked at them and gave them some advice. Goliaths are not welcome in the Empire. You will need to be cautious moving through the lands. Find Mavith in Sobral and tell him I am coming. Tell him we will find a way to get to Harbet and search for his sister. Thelna looked confused. Warlord, Rook's estate is south of Agurtra. If Myra still lives, then I will go there with Mavith. I interrupted impatiently. You need to go. Sobral City is 1,000 miles northeast from here. I looked over the group of malnourished Goliaths in worn clothing. They had barely grabbed anything from the cave below in their rush. Maybe a week's worth of food each. Will we be attacked? We don't speak your language, Thelna said, feeling overwhelmed herself. We have nothing. Shit. She was right, so many problems. I placed a large pile of silver coins on the rock to my right, along with all the ration bars I had in my space and 3 backpacks. 3 elven daggers and 3 elven hand axes followed, and then all 3 of my non-legion raincloaks. Mouthwash, I said, holding up a jar. Swish it for 30 seconds and spit or not swallow. It will correct your yellowed teeth so you won't look like an ogre. This should get you. They all stared in disbelief at the pile of gear and coin that had appeared out of nowhere. I snapped my fingers to gain their attention. This should get you to Sobral. Use my name Legionnaire Eric of Mage Castile's company. Duchess Veronica of the city is friendly to Goliaths and will take you into her service. But I do not know how other cities along the way will treat you, so be cautious. I wasn't sure if Veronica would take them in, but she seemed the type, and she had welcomed all the refugees from the war. Their eyes broke from the miraculous pile of goods. This caused another flurry of conversation as Thelna explained to the others, and she asked me, Why? Why do you help us? For Mavith. He is the closest thing I have to a little brother, my junior, I added, smirking as that was what Mavith had called me the first time we traveled together. Make sure you tell him his big brother Eric is coming. He is not to leave before I arrive. Fortuna and the fates had hit me again. It was possible that Zorana was already dead, but just the chance made it worthwhile to try and find her. I was certain the chaos of the orc invasion was going to allow me the freedom to join him. My loyalty to helping Castile break her own chains was the only thing giving me pause to leave immediately. I noticed the heavy anklets again. Wait, let me remove them. Thalna looked confused. The keys are held by the captain of the ship. We are his. Stand still and don't move, I ordered, ignoring her. I removed a chunk of metal opposite the hinge. The heavy iron anklet resisted my efforts, but I won the struggle. Thelna's eyes bulged as the manacle dropped. Are these artifacts? I asked, looking stupefied at the freed anklet. She answered numbly. Ah, yes. It allows pain to be transmitted but has a short range. They can also use them to track us. We thought if we got far enough away we would not be pursued. I broke the other 3 ankle manacles, using most of my remaining ether. Now, take these supplies and go. Head straight west for a few days and then northeast. Find Sobril and tell Mavith about Myra and Zorana. Use the Duchess's name if you run into trouble. Duchess Veronica. Tell them you are to be wardens in her service. Not speaking Tellian might be a problem for them, but there was only so much I could do. I turned and started to head back into the woods. I still might have time to use the collector on the bodies. A late thank you echoed behind me from the stunned Goliaths. My thoughts churned in my head as I reached the first body and mechanically used the collector on it. From the tattooed pathfinders, I managed to collect only 4 essences. As it had been some time since this encounter started, I was lucky to get anything. 2 minor perception essences, a major strength, and 1 minor coordination. The sky was graying with the coming morning, and I checked my message book. Centurion Sergius scrawled a thick message. Corvus has spotted the fleet. Where are you, hound? The message just angered me, and made me want to catch up to the Goliaths and escort them to Sobril and fuck off from serving the Centurion. I held off on response while I finished with the bodies. I didn't spend time searching the bodies too intensely, just grabbing their orc stamina and healing potions. It brought my count of the light, foul-smelling healing potions to 27, and the green vomit-tasting stamina potions to 29. I searched for artifacts but only found an orc-forged hand axe that I took from their leader, Raka. I found no documents or orders. Maybe there was valuable loot down in the cave on the beach, but I was not going to risk being seen by the anchored ship. I moved south through the forest for an hour before resting and answering my Centurion. Pathfinders chased me, and I have been delayed. I will be there in a few hours. I checked the book every hour, but the Centurion never wrote anything again. The day was surprisingly warm, and the bird song as I ran told me that maybe spring was coming to this part of the Tellian Empire. I crested the ridge and used the spyglass to see the fleet was still over 24 miles south by my estimate. I should be running into Hound Corvus soon, so I increased the frequency of my Earth-speak pulses while I ran just below the ridgeline. I dove behind some rocks as my pulse finally returned to danger 40 feet ahead. 2 more Earth pulses confirmed it was a hound. I used my hands to make 2 deep throaty bird calls that were soon returned. The hound stood out from his cover, and I did the same as we took in each other. Hound Corvus was tall, and his hound armor was well worn. He was also filthy, like he had been rolling in a charcoal pit. I guessed he had darkened himself to help move unseen at night. He finally asked, Hound Eric? I nodded. How did you spot me? I was downwind from him, and a scent of sharp ammonia and vomit hung in the air. Caught your scent on the air, I stated. He seemed to consider my response before nodding and smiling. Our hound clothes generally masked our scents, but not for this hound, apparently. He sniffed himself and chuckled. True, not even a nymph would stoop low enough to let me have my way with her right now. An ogre found my lookout a few days back, and I had to cut it into pieces to haul it away from my station. I grimaced, knowing how unpleasant a task that would have been. He looked over his shoulder. They have put more pathfinders ashore south of here. We are going to have to circle wide to avoid them. Any word of the war in the east? I asked as I got upwind of him to lead us on our path. Nothing good, the spring campaign has started. Nothing good, the spring campaign has started. The elves took Comporjo, and they'll likely threaten Karenhagen soon. The Barteradians took Aliska south of Maka yesterday, But Duke Tiberius still has control of Girakas. Things should be grinding to a halt as everyone fortifies their gains, and it will turn into a war of attrition until the larger pieces come into play, Hound Corvus said behind me. I ground my teeth a little. It was clear Centurion Sergius was keeping him informed, but not me. Did Centurius write anything else? What larger pieces? I asked casually. He had clearly been wanting me to ask what he meant by larger pieces. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention the Emperor is preparing to leave the capital to retake Camporgio by wiping the elves away with his void magic. He's going to march with 5,000 Imperial Legionnaires at his back and 20 mage companies. Soon the Eastern Empire will firmly be back in Tellian hands, and the elves will wish they had never broken the treaty. He grunted, losing some of his cheer. Hopefully, we in the Western Empire can hold long enough to get reinforced. The only thing that ran through my mind was the Emperor had joined the war effort. What did that mean for Castel, for the company, and for Xina? And how was I going to check the message stone in the company of another hound? We moved west before circling south to avoid the pathfinders. Corvus was talkative for a hound as he remained a few steps behind me. Noticed your accent. Where are you from? A small village in the far south of Tsinga, I replied cautiously. Were your parents from the Tellian Empire then? He asked as we slowed to move across a clearing. Don't know. They never told me where I was from. It felt like he was digging a little bit. Being on guard from both the wilds and my companion was mentally taxing. Just never heard of a foreigner in the hounds, he said innocently enough. Well, times are desperate, and I have proven myself many times over to the Empire. I held up my hand and took cover. I pointed in the distance at a humanoid. Good eyes, he said. Must have wandered up from the swamps. Still, it is a long way from home. He dropped in sudden thought and took out his notebook. His pages were full of script as he paged to a blank page. I was definitely being short-changed in the information dissemination category. I watched as he wrote, reading. A lone swamp troll on the coast. The orcs may have pushed into the swamp and stirred them up. Any activity along the border forts? I frowned as Corvus got an almost immediate response. Just normal troglodyte activity. Has the new hound reached your position? Corvus scrawled a response. He is with me now. We are moving to the mouth of the Varvau River. Good. They shouldn't be able to sail up the river, and it will slow them. Report on their movements. I will need you at the archives in a few days. A dragon shitstorm is forming. The goblins have been active to the south, and a horde may be forming. I am sending 2 hounds from the archives to keep an eye on them. Corvus seemed to consider before writing. Do you want me to go now? No, Dartio. I will order you when it is time to go to the archives. Corvus sighed and closed his book. Do you want me to go to the archives in your place? I asked. The hound laughed softly. I doubt my father would be very pleased to see you there. Maybe in a few years. He will trust you. He asked me to form an opinion of you. I was a bit stunned. Centurion Sergius is your father? I asked conversationally, while tracking the troll in the distance. Yes, he is, he said with exasperation. That is why he won't send me into danger, and he is pulling me to the archives. Nepotism at its best, he said lightheartedly. I digested that before asking about the troll. What are we going to do about our friend? We will watch him a bit and make sure he is alone. If it pursues us, a few bleeding arrows will slow him down but won't kill him. They have an incredible sense of smell, and I don't want to risk it finding our trail. You remember trolls regenerate? Corvus asked. He didn't ask about the absence of my own bow. I nodded. I asked. No, we don't have time to wait for it to weaken so that we can get in close and lay fire on it. 3 or 4 bleeding arrows into it and we can run. If it chases us, the severe blood loss will quickly slow it down. After we circle around, we will leave myconid powder in our wake which will conceal our passing. We waited for a quarter of an hour, watching the troll move large boulders. It was apparently building a dwelling. Okay, there may be others in the area, but we are not waiting. Remember your training. Trolls have difficulty bending over. So if it chases us, stay under low branches. It will slow him enough to bleed out from the poison and weaken. Corvus advised, taking the lead. I got a full blast of his scent when he stepped in front of me. How could he stand himself? As we circled around, the troll inevitably caught Corvu's scent and stood tall, sniffing the air. At 100 yards, I could see it more clearly. It was the height of two men with gray-green skin covered in discolored patches. Corvus didn't wait and notched an arrow. In one quick motion he pulled and released. The troll was still sniffing the air when the first arrow thudded into his thigh. A second struck a moment later in his chest. My companion was a decent shot. "Time to move," Corvus said, running. He started ahead of me, but I didn't want to deal with his odor, so I moved in front of him. "You've got some legs on you," he huffed from behind me after a while. Pause for a bit while I spread the myconid spores. I followed his instructions and listened to the woods. Early spring birds chirped, accompanied by the distant sound of crashing branches. We had put considerable distance between ourselves and the troll. Corvus wisely spread the spores across the branches, anticipating that the troll would shatter them and receive a face full of the spores. We continued our flight south, and after a few miles, he finally broke the silence. "That was exhilarating," he chuckled. "We can start to angle back to Kraken Bay and slow down." We continued slowly and silently among the trees, angling west. When we paused to eat, the weather had gotten humid, and Corvus was attracting the freshly hatched and voracious flies. I sat upwind of him as he slapped the annoying insects. A thought occurred to me as I watched his neck drip from a nasty bug bite. I handed him a small cloth bandage. He thanked me, and unfortunately after wiping his neck, he pocketed the cloth. I decided to risk taking a sample from Corvus. I sent a tiny sliver of his flesh into my dimensional space from his thigh, and my aether bottomed out. He slapped hard, thinking one of the flies had gotten under his clothes. "Damn it. Let's move. These flies must be the only thing that liked the ogre's stench." I nodded and stood. I now had a blood sample to use in my blood compass. When Corvus was ordered to the archives, I could track him. We had to swim across one wide river before we reached the coast. The height of the ridgeline had faded, giving us less of a high-perched view of Kraken Bay, reducing the distance we could see. We both scanned the waters for the orc ships. "Nothing," I said after changing the magnification a few times. Corvus lowered his spyglass. "I have one ship northwest, probably the one that dropped off the Pathfinders. The inlet to the Varvau River is just 10 miles south. They should be anchored there and unloading their troops. They won't be able to sail up the river." He opened his book, read a message, and scribbled a response. Unsurprisingly, my own message book lacked new orders when I checked. "We need to find the fleet," Corvus said testily after he was done responding. "Any news?" I indicated his closed book. Corvus sighed, but answered. "The Emperor marches the day after tomorrow. The elves are pushing hard for Carenhagen, and he will arrive on time to intercept them. The dukes south of Maka are struggling with the Bartaradians. There is nothing left to reinforce Varvau. They are going to have to hold out on their own. But the forts along the Agorian front are being abandoned to reinforce the city. That should give them another 6,000 soldiers. But no legionnaires or mages," Corvus said, doubt creeping into his words about the Empire's chances. "The Agorian front consisted of a series of forts along the western swamps that kept the trolls and troglodytes at bay. It was where I first joined Castiel's company. But it felt like ages ago." Corvus got my attention. "Let's move cautiously. If the fleet is nearby, I expect there to be more Pathfinders ashore." We did move a lot slower, and I continued pulsing Earth's speak as we shadowed the shoreline. We saw the dark, heavy smoke first, and Corvus frowned. "That is where the town of Bracara is located. It is at the mouth of the Varvau River." He had his spyglass out, but we didn't have an angle to see the origin of the smoke. By the intensity of the smoke, it was clear the orcs had sacked the town. "Where are the warships, then?" I asked, scanning with my own spyglass. Corvus was confused as well. "They might be anchored in the river, but it is too shallow and has too fast a current for the large ships to sail up to Varvau Lake. We will wait until dark to descend and scout the town." We moved away from the coast to make camp. As we set camp, Corvus commented, "I'm surprised. Most sentries are hard to work with. Myself, of course, being the exception." He had a self-deprecating smile. I felt I needed to explain myself. During hound training, I was far superior to the others in most skills. The other pups did not like constantly losing to me. He studied me before saying, "The hounds have been taking on unqualified men the last few years. Perhaps the centurions need to be more open-minded and let more foreigners like you into our ranks." He was not very subtle in testing me. I didn't hesitate in my response. I think they are smart not to. The Empire needs to be certain those who defend its borders are loyal and not traitors. He picked up his warm tea from the thermal stone. Perhaps. The truth-seekers are known to be fallible. The bastard was definitely testing me. Did he suspect something? No, it must be Centurion Sergius who picked up on something when he questioned me. What had I said that made him doubt me? I thought I did a good job not expressing a reaction to his statement as I responded. I have never heard of anyone fooling a truth-seeker. How is that accomplished? I asked calmly. He studied me while I chewed on some spiced jerky. It is not fooling the truth-seeker, but the truth-seeker whose loyalties are suspect. He took a long pull of his tea. Did you know 2 Imperial truth-seekers were found to be working for the Eisenham elves? This was no normal hound. He knew things that he should not be privy to. I did not. How do you know about it? Corvus grinned a little vainly. My father is preparing me to take over the Western Hounds. When I am promoted to Centurion, I will need good people close to me. He said I should look at you closely, Corvus confided. I was left a little shocked. Was he playing mind games with me? Or was this genuine? Corvus, besides smelling like ass, definitely had a charisma to him. I will take a watch, and you can get 2 hours of sleep. I didn't object, but only closed my eyes and steadied my breathing. I kept my ears on alert in my faux sleep until Corvus woke me. We were fortunate to have a cloudy night, covering Neptune's tear and the bright stars. With our night vision goggles, we moved to investigate the town under cover of darkness. Even though Corvus' position appeared to be garnered through nepotism, he was a very competent hound, and against my better judgment, I was actually finding myself liking him. From a half-mile away, I could smell the burnt wood long before we reached the town. It looked abandoned, with over half the town smoldering. We took cover and scanned the ruins together. I had the right and he had the left. I see a few orcs. No apparent pathfinders, I whispered. 7 on my side. No sign of any Tellians besides a few charred bodies. Most would have fled, and any captured would have been collared and loaded on the ships. But where are the ships? Not even the one we saw a few hours ago is here. I scanned the water to confirm, but I did not see anything. Are there any other hounds stationed nearby? I asked, thinking he might know. There were only 3 of us in Kraken Bay. Jakob, who spotted the fleet, was killed by pathfinders according to my father. We are the only 2 left. Hercule was recalled to join Marconisi Pack to hunt down an infiltrator. He stood slowly, making a decision. We are going upriver. It is the only place those warships could be. We backed away from Bracara and made our way south along the Varvau River. It was only a short time before we found an anchored ship. Oil lamps and glowstones highlighted it through the budding trees. I followed Corvus to the shore to study the ship from a distance. A dead fish floated by, and then another. Corvus was focused on the ship's deck with his spyglass. I can see a second ship anchored a mile further up. They shouldn't have been able to sail this far up the river. Do you think the dead fish have something to do with it? I asked, pointing. Corvus looked down, confused at the dozens of dead fish floating by. He scooped up some water, which was thick with mud, and cursed. Let's go. I need to tell my father. I had an inkling of what he surmised as we moved away from the river to a safe distance. He opened his book and wrote, "The orc clerics are widening and deepening the river. The fleet is traveling upriver and will reach the lake and then sail onto Varveo." Just like before, he did not have to wait long for a response from the Centurion. I was surprised Corvus was not keeping the communication secret from me as the words scrawled across the page as they were written. Leave the new hound to follow the fleet's progress. You are to get to the archives now. Corvus closed the book, relief on his face. I assumed it was because he would soon be out of danger. Looks like this is where we part company. Hound Eric. Try to keep yourself alive. The Empire needs men like you. He extended his hand for us to shake wrists. As Corvus prepared to leave, he left me his bow, quiver, and most of his gear. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. You need it more than me. I know where there is a hound cache about 100 miles from here, Eric. Take it and stop complaining. I will be fine, he said with an affable smile. There are caches, I asked, confused as they were not part of the training. He studied me for a moment and then nodded in confirmation. Just in the Western Empire. My father set them up, and only a few hounds have the maps. He considered me and pulled off his leather-hound jacket. Under the light of a glowstone, a map of part of the Western Empire was clearly inscribed inside. The cache locations are only visible under the light of Neptune's tear. He covered the glowstone, and a dozen pricks lit up brightly on the map under the moon's light. I will see about getting you a map to the caches when I see you again. They are buried a foot deep, so goblins don't find them. They are always located near a forking tree, and there is a marker stone over the cache. Each cache has 2 full sets of hound gear and 4 weeks' worth of ration bars. He shouldered his jacket back on and nodded to me. I will need all the artifacts you took from the first citizen trader. He looked apologetic. Do you want the gold she carried as well? I asked, without hesitation, in a neutral tone. He considered for a long moment. That is probably best. I pulled the amulet over my head and the pack from my dimensional space and handed it to him. The ring and dagger are in the pack. He hefted the pack, appreciating the weight. He looked confused and disappointed. Those were the only artifacts she was carrying? I nodded, and he sighed, and the hound moved away at a jog. At least not every hound in the Western Empire was an asshole. Something tickled in the back of my mind, but quickly slipped away. When I was sure he was gone, I sent the gear he left me to my dimensional space. There was no point in carrying it at this point. The Varvo River was 50 miles long and drained Varvo Lake into Kraken Bay. I moved cautiously into the woods, pulsing earth speak. My goal was to circle extremely wide from the river and reach the lake ahead of the fleet. Then, I could report when the orc fleet arrived. The fleet would take time, probably days, crossing the 50-mile-long lake to disembark its forces near the city of Varvo if they were relying on magic to widen and deepen the river. As I moved south, the terrain changed. Gone were the hills and rocky elevations. I was now traveling through wet, lowland forests. I continued pulsing my earth speak as I went, wanting to avoid any unexpected danger. After narrowly avoiding a face-to-face encounter with a monstrous spider, I was glad I had been cautious. The tunnels of the spider's den extended far past the limited range of my earth-speak pulse, and I happily left it, and whatever else was lurking in there, well alone. As morning came, I took one of the minor perception essences. A momentary brain freeze with passing pressure behind the eyes indicated the essence was working. I blinked away my momentary migraine and continued. With the light of a new day, I increased my pace to ensure I got ahead of the fleet moving up the river and hopefully avoiding any more pathfinders. The muddy terrain soon had my boots caked, and muddy water had soaked into my pants and socks. I was focused on moving silently and surprised a pair of gnolls who were bedded down. There were only 2 in range of my earth pulse, and I diverted slightly to remove them from the ecosystem. The 2 creatures were entwined with each other in slumber, a fresh carcass of a fawn nearby from their hunt last night. My black blade took the largest one completely unaware. The second leaped up when its mate barked in pain from my blade piercing its chest. It was initially too slow to gain its spear to defend itself. My blade lashed out, cutting deeply into its thigh as it fell away. The muscle cut was deep, and it couldn't stand but wrapped its clawed hand around its weapon. When it feebly attacked with the spear, my invisible air shield deflected the weapon wide, and my blade finished the male gnoll. I checked on the first gnoll, and it had bled out from the stab wound near its heart. Its belly was bloated, and its teats were swollen. It was a pregnant female. Even now, I could see the belly turning as the pups inside started to suffocate from the lack of blood circulating to them. Gnolls were a pestilence on the land, and I didn't feel guilty about killing the unborn ones. I couldn't stand to let them suffer, though. I retrieved the collector and placed it over the female. The collector pulled from both the mother and the unborn. This surprised me as I watched it work and form an apex essence of empathy. The modest-sized light pink sphere was a surprise byproduct. I assumed it had something to do with the female gnoll's relationship with her unborn pups. It caused a twinge of guilt that I quickly compartmentalized. Her belly was now still, and I moved to the other gnoll, getting a minor essence of endurance. I paused to move the male close to the female, leveraging the corpse over to her with his spear, so they could be together in death. I continued south, avoiding other dens and burrows of creatures when my earth speak detected them. I didn't need to get slowed down again. This region was definitely more wild than other parts of the Empire. All of the practice with the Earth Speak spell form was continuing to train my skill in interpreting the feedback from the spell efficiently. My path intercepted the Varvo River, and I could see why Corvus thought the orcs would not be able to navigate it. Not only was the river narrow, but a number of fallen trees impeded its slow-moving waters. A narrow channel had been cleared in the center just wide enough to allow a barge to pass through. At least I knew I had gotten ahead of the orc war fleet. I followed the river upstream till sunset and rested on a small earthen mound with a view of a section of the river and checked my sending book. Centurion Sergius had sent me a message. You must delay the orc fleet. Ensure it does not reach Varvo for 5 days. Reinforcements will arrive through the portal in Varvo after repelling the Barteradians, but they need time. Irritably, I wrote back, I am one person. You want me to stop a war fleet? Get ahead of the fleet and use trees to block the river? Set fire to one of the ships at night. Kill some sentries. Do what is required of you, Hound. I clenched my teeth at the order. The Centurion was essentially ordering me to my death. I was sure there were powerful mages on those ships as they were rapidly clearing and widening the river. It also was not lost on me that he had recalled his son before ordering me alone to stop a fleet of 38 warships by myself. I moved to the banks of the river and was unhappy as my earth-speak pulse did not echo clearly through the water. Only when the water was heavily clouded with mud would the pulse give me a clear image. I took a few moments to find a large tree, nearly 4 feet in diameter. I removed a large wedge of the tree and the act bottomed out my aether. How did a tree resist my ability? As the tree slowly succumbed to gravity, the trunk cracked and echoed. I faded into the woods to wait out my ether recovery, as I planned to practice my new career as a lumberjack further south along the river. The massive tree crashed down, and the subsequent splash caused dozens of birds to take flight and something large to stir the waters. I was rather proud of my efforts, and was considering trying to get one of the trees to fall across one of the decks of the ships when a loud buzzing sound cut the air. Had I disturbed a nest, I backed further away from the river. A swarm of fist-sized bees or maybe hornets swept over the tree. A fish leaped and seized one from the air, but they did not flee. The buzzing cloud seemed to inspect the damage, starting with the upper branches and proceeding to where the tree was cut. They had a weird intelligence to theme. I spun and started running. My guess is they had to be controlled by an orc priest. The orcs called their mages priests or clerics, not mages. It was a small point to harp on at the moment. I think I had been far enough away that they did not notice me, but I didn't stop running for an hour. I didn't have bug spray to handle dozens of large, stinging insects. The only good thing about this enemy was they were easy to hear from a distance. During my rest, I could hear them in the early spring canopy of leaves, as their buzzing zigged and zagged the distance along the river, searching for me. I moved down the river and continued to fell large trees every 3 miles as my ether permitted. The entire time I listened for the warning buzzing. If I was spotted, it would be my last tree. After the 4th tree, I reached the outlet from Varvo Lake. The expansive, fresh body of water looked more like an ocean or sea from the shore. I didn't admire it for long, felling one more tree before I moved along the western shore, gaining distance from the outlet. When I reached a spot about 7 miles away, I set up a sentry post by hollowing out one of the few boulders along the shore and making a slit to use my spyglass. After the long, grueling day of constant surging adrenaline, I rested and waited in hopeful safety. As the evening came, I opened the book to report, dropped a few trees to slow their progress. They have not reached Varvo Lake. I then took out my sending stone from Zyna. Maybe tonight was the night she would contact me. There was no immediate response from either device as I consumed a warm burrito and cold blood orange juice. I sealed the entrance to my hollowed-out, improvised hideout. I took short naps all night, and when I woke, I was briefly disoriented from my dreams. I used the night vision goggles in concert with my spyglass, awaiting the imminent fleet's arrival. The orc fleet still hadn't arrived by morning, and I noted that fact in my book, which still had no responses from Centurion Sergius. Disappointedly, I stored my messaging stone. It wasn't until near sunset that I heard the familiar buzzing of the spy drone insects. It had taken me most of the day to come up with that name for the insect swarm. Of course, my cleverness would be lost on the people of this world. It wasn't until late into the night that the first ship appeared. Both the book and stone had been absent of messages for another day. The first ship was preceded by some underwater monstrosity surging out of the mouth of the river, either some creature they controlled or something that thought better than to confront the orc clerics. An hour later, the trees seemed to twist away from the banks, and the water churned a muddy mix before I noticed the sails. The ship moved slowly up the river and then out into the lake. A nearly naked female orc stood on the bow, sweating from her efforts, and I assumed by her body movements that she was the one clearing the way with her etheric magic. She was fit, and her body was untouched by tattoos. Her glossy black hair was braided and swung behind her as she moved. She seemed to stumble, and a massive, heavily tattooed orc rushed to cover her in a heavy fur cloak. I burned her face into my memory, as she was clearly a powerful cleric of the Caliphate. She was helped below deck, and my attention turned to the rest of the ship. Dozens of other orcs, most of whom were also tattooed, worked across the deck, storing sails. Others scanned the water and shore in the light of the moon. There were over 100 orcs just on the deck of this first ship. Saturn only knew how many were below deck. The ship didn't travel far before dropping an anchor. 20 minutes later, a second ship just as formidable joined the first. Through the spyglass, I spotted other orc clerics on deck supplying the sails with etheric wind. A third warship was coming behind, its sails barely visible to me. I scribbled into my book. The first warship just reached the lake. They are waiting on the others. I estimate it should be half a day before the fleet starts to sail for Varvo. I thought I had done a fairly good job slowing them. If my estimation was correct, I would have given Varvo nearly 4 out of the 5 days the Centurion requested. Apparently, my effort was not appreciated, and the script flowed across the page. Duke Tiberius needs 4 more days to rout the Barteradians and send reinforcements. I stared at the words and shook my head. Doing the math in my head, he wanted me to stall them for a total of 6 days, not 5. Duke Tiberius was also the duke who had dragged his feet and left us to face the Barteradian army in Macha, with just 2 mages to defend the walls against overwhelming odds. If I did nothing, the fleet would take half a day to form up and probably a day to sail the 50 miles to Varva with the aid of the clerics. The only thing I could think to do was swim out in the lake and remove a section of the hull to sink a few ships before they discovered me and drowned me in short order. I was mostly certain each warship had at least 1 cleric, but probably more. I continued to watch as ship after ship emerged, about 1 every 20 minutes, like the river was giving birth to Varvio's doom in the middle of the night. There was an infrequent sound of buzzing overhead as their insect drones searched for threats. When the 38th ship emerged, shortly before midday, they did not sail immediately as I had predicted. Scanning the decks, I understood the delay. Their priests were not on deck, so they were recovering their either below at least that is what I presumed. There was almost no wind to move their ships, so it would have to be supplied. The warriors on deck had also thinned considerably. They had been prepared for an attack when they emerged into the lake, and nothing had materialized, and were now resting for when they reached the city. I decided not to throw away my life, and would remain here. Once the fleet passed, I would report and race west. I pulled out my blood compass and carefully retrieved Corvus' sample on a piece of clean cloth. The tiny bit of flesh soaked the cloth with blood, and then I dried it with my hound thermal stone. Wet blood would corrode the compass and make it more difficult to clean. I made sure the compass was prepared as well, heating and cleaning it thoroughly. Then, I activated it with the new dried sample. The pull was weak, so Corvus was already a good distance away. My duplicity had been successful, though. I should be able to follow the compass to the archives. I relaxed in my stone coffin and waited. There didn't appear to be much activity on the ships, even as evening approached hours later. Maybe they were waiting on something else. Centurion Sergius had asked for an update in the book. I replied. All 38 ships emerged from the river. I have managed to prevent them from sailing immediately, but cannot hold them much longer. Taking credit for their clerics clearly resting to recover may have been a little hubris on my part. As if my words had cursed me, a few decks started to light up with lamps and glowstones. The female priest who had led the first ship walked imperiously on deck toward the bow, dropping her heavy cloak and revealing herself once again. The decks were awash with activity as orcs, and a few Goliaths moved to ready the fleet to sail. I wrote my message. The The fleet will sail in the next hour for Varvao. I have done all I could. I was expecting a good job or throw yourself in front of the ship or something else. Instead, the message was, we can discuss your failure when we meet next. Get to Varva and report to Mage Commander Gracious. I looked at the message for a long time in disbelief. He wanted me to go to a city that was going to be besieged by orcs in a day's time. I had flashes of Maca and slowly shook my head, closing the book. There was also almost no way I could get there before the fleet anyway. I pulled the blood compass out of my belt and prepared to leave after the fleet sailed past my position. 2 hours later, the first sail was raised, and the others followed as the armada proceeded toward Varvao. As I made ready to leave, my earth pulse picked up movement. Shit pathfinders were walking the shore, ready to shadow the fleet as it moved. Where there was one pathfinder, there were guaranteed to be more. The entrance to my artificial cave would take a lot of work to find. I had dropped the clean-cut stone in the water, and been cautious walking around the boulder to avoid leaving signs of my passing. That didn't mean a lot if they had tracking magic, and my heart rate accelerated. The first pathfinder climbed the boulder. I told myself it was the best viewpoint on this stretch of shoreline, so his action made sense. My heart thudded louder as my adrenaline surged, and a second pathfinder was in range when I pulsed again. It soon joined the first atop my stone domicile. They started a quiet conversation in Orshish as the fleet sailed past our position a mile off the shore. The ships were cloistered together with lights on the bow and stern. I tensed when a third pathfinder moved behind the boulder, and I suddenly felt trapped. I had thought my idea brilliant as I didn't use ether to conceal myself, which might be visible to a mage, and the insect swarm couldn't find me with just my narrow viewing slit. At least I had the Aether Shield amulet. I reached for it around my neck and panicked when it was gone. Had I dropped it? I retraced my steps in my mind. I had given it to Corvus, but the memory was fuzzy. Had I given him the ring as well? Shit, yes, and the packs of gold. It took me a few moments to unravel my memories. He must have used a spell form on me to make me obedient. I suddenly didn't think there were any good hounds in the Western Empire. I realized while he was showing me the map on his jacket, he had been worming himself into my perception of him. Maybe he had been doing it from the moment we met. I concluded that must have been it. The ogre scent was probably a distraction to overload my senses, so I wouldn't notice his influence strangely enough. Something I learned in hound training. It made my current decision to abandon my mission all the easier. I just needed to escape the orc pathfinders first. One of the orcs let out a stream of piss onto the rock, and of course my viewport was in the path of the waterfall. I blocked the tiny splatter with my forearm and considered removing his instrument for the insult, but I restrained myself. Most likely, the pathfinders would move away with the fleet, and I just needed to wait it out. The water was glass tonight, and only the waves created by the passing ships a mile away rippled the surface. The fleet was painfully slow, as their priests needed to produce the wind for the massive sails. One pathfinder jumped down in front of me and walked slowly to the water. He was staring into the shallows, and I cursed my bad luck. He must have spotted the clean-cut stone I had dropped in there, and now Neptune's tear reflected off the polished stone. He called the second one over, and even though I couldn't understand their language, I could tell they were trying to puzzle out why the large, perfectly fresh-cut stone blocks were submerged just offshore. I increased the frequency of Earth-speak pulses, and the third pathfinder had moved south already. These two were not giving up as their hands became animated, and they seemed to be arguing about the stone. I had dropped 4 blocks in total, all mostly square, to create my 6-foot cube chamber. My dimensional space was too packed to hold on to them, and I thought I had been clever about placing them there. My luck got even worse when one of them turned to face the rock. It was dark, and my viewing slit was not large, just 1 inch in height and 6 wide. He walked around the boulder, inspecting it, and looking for where the quarried stone may have come from. He missed my elevated slit in the dark, but stopped at the entrance. When he called over his companion, I knew my time was limited. My door was 3 inches of stone, but I had made it loose enough that I could kick it out rather than use either to move it. With the next Earth-speak pulse, I could tell he had found the fine seam in the stone. One of the 2 pathfinders had pulled his skinning knife, and was trying unhurriedly to get it into the seam to pry open what they must be guessing was a hidden cache. The echoing scratching of the blade on the stone was a bit unnerving as he worked. I pulsed Earth Speak twice more to ensure I was only dealing with 2 pathfinders within the 40 feet of me. I prepared for the encounter, and when I was ready, I acted. The stone door disappeared into my dimensional space, leaving a surprised male orc to receive a lunging, stabbing attack from the orc's bane. I had been aiming for his throat, but he reacted quickly and stood. The blade still pierced his sternum, and he bellowed a pained cry. I scrambled out of my self-made prison and tossed all 3 pellets at the other pathfinder. My first victim was still screaming in pain, and I wouldn't say I liked the sword effect of inflicting pain. It drew too much attention. With the night vision goggles, I could only see one other pathfinder much further down the shore, probably the one that had passed us 20 minutes earlier. I finished the wailing orc before me by jerking the blade down, cutting his sternum open and destroying his heart and lungs. I cursed under my breath when bright lights bloomed over the nearest ship, illuminating the sky and shoreline like it was the middle of the day. The spores had blinded the other pathfinder, and it was time to run. I slashed the disoriented pathfinder in the neck and dashed into the woodlands, heading east away from the lake. I was unencumbered as I raced through the trees. Shadows danced on the trees as more ships cast their own magic flares into the sky and over the woods. I didn't think the orc invasion would consider me much of a threat, as I was just a single hound. I was wrong. The buzzing of insects soon followed me as I tried to open distance from Varvo Lake. My Earth Speak was a blessing as it framed a pathfinder waiting to ambush me ahead. Instead, I cut around opposite the tree at the last second and attacked him from the other side before he could react. 1 air shield and 2 slashes from Orc's Bane ended the unfortunate pathfinder. The lake was awash with activity as the sounds of orcs echoed through the woods, and more etheric flares appeared overhead. A wasp stung my neck, and I swatted the golf ball-sized insect in annoyance. I quickly used Purify Self to eliminate the burning poison from the insect, and I was racing again into the woods. More of the aggravating insects attacked my exposed skin and tracked me as I ran. I was having a really bad night and was sweating profusely with the humid air. I didn't understand their desire to hunt me down. Didn't they have a city to conquer? About 2 hours into my frantic flight, the trees finally went silent, and I no longer heard the incessant buzzing above. I didn't slow down and tried to run faster, thinking I had escaped their range to control the insects. I tried to recover my ether, but still pulsed Earth Speak frequently. Unfortunately, Earth Speak couldn't see flying creatures. I had no idea what crashed into me from above. Whatever it was, it had talons and ripped off my night vision goggles and cut deep into my neck and cheek, but failed to grip my shoulder as I twisted hard away. I suppose that grappling the goggles was better than grappling my head. I was still slammed hard into the ground from its attack, knocking the wind out of me. I was in a mostly open area and scrambled for the cover of some dead trees as I drank 2 of the orc lesser healing potions from my belt. Blood flowed freely down my neck, soaking my undershirt. I listened intently for the creature in the skies, but only heard my heart pounding in my ears. The rancid taste of the potions hit me and made holding back my vomit reflex difficult. But I couldn't waste either on healing myself with an enemy so close. Did the orcs send it, or was it just another predator? With only the light of the moon, I scanned the skies as my wounds closed. Wherever the night vision goggles were, I counted them lost. Maybe the hound caches would have a replacement, but it was not a concern at the moment. I noticed the stars were blotted out by an avian silhouette. I raced for the trees and checked on my ether more than enough to eliminate this threat. I checked twice more to make sure it was diving for a second attack as the silhouette grew in size. It was difficult to get the timing placement right and capture enough of the beast to kill it while running. I attempted to roll away from its talons this time, but still got a slash across my back, tearing my hound armor and getting tossed away like a dirty sock. But my aether did bottom out, telling me I had some success. The avian creature failed to come out of its dive as it crashed into the ground and continued to demolish a few trees, ending with a pained cry. I had taken a piece of the wing instead of the head as I had planned. Still, it was effective as the gargantuan bird flailed on the ground, tangled and broken in the grove of shattered trees. I guessed it was a juvenile rock in the moonlight, as the wingspan was not impressive at 40 or so feet. From Hearn's teachings, rocks had wingspans over 100 feet and nested hundreds of miles north of here. As the raptor flail disabled, it snapped its impressive beak toward me in anger at its predicament. It was acting like I had attacked it and not the other way around. I muttered more to myself than it. Mess with the bull. Get the horns, Tweety. It was still a dangerous enemy, and I didn't need to finish it off. I inhaled sharply. Was that a harness on its back in the moonlight? Was there a rider? Could my knight get any worse? He must be dead with how hard the rock crashed and slammed into the trees. If there was a rider, more Orcus would be coming, and my aether pool was empty. I tossed a pellet to blind the rock and hobbled away. I was guessing the rock belonged to the orc invasion forces and was some nightmarish pet. Either way, it was not going to follow me in its condition, and I had to hope it was the only one. My hound jacket was now mostly shredded, and I balled it up to dispose of when I got to safety. Without the goggles, I was limited to seeing only with my Earth Speak spell form. I reached the cover of dense evergreens and finally rested while I recovered ether to heal my wounds. The ether recovery ring was a huge blessing, doubling my ether recovery. My self-healing told me the damage to my shoulder was severe. I had just been in too much shock to realize it. I remained stationary while I waited for dawn, restoring my ether and healing the damage. Without the goggles, I was worried about another attack from above in the dark. The aftertaste of the orc potion stuck to my tongue, and water wouldn't wash it away. The mouthwash potion was at least successful. Miles away, I could still hear the rock bellowing angrily at its predicament of being grounded and blinded. When the gray dawn sky arrived, I was healed enough, and continued my flight westward. I hoped the Caliphate had given up on its pursuit of me. I had to be at least 20 miles from the fleet now. At least I didn't see anything in the skies or hear anything that made me suspect I was being followed. I opened the message book to read it for the last time. No new orders had been written, and I would not be writing anything ever again. Hopefully, by my lack of response, they would think I had been killed or captured by the Bhutan Caliphate. I sent the book back to my dimensional space for the last time. I used the blood compass to orient myself and ran in that direction, pulsing Earth Speak frequently. I was heading northwest and knew this was some of the wildest parts of the Telian Empire. Large swaths of land the Empire claimed, but had no presence in. There were no roads for hundreds of miles, and I was unsure where the blood compass was taking me. The weather remained humid as I jogged at a steady pace, pulsing Earth Speak infrequently. After a full day of distancing myself from the orc invasion, I relaxed a bit less paranoid about being pursued by pathfinders. Vartaholm, the nearest city in the direction I was headed, was 400 miles away, and according to my maps of the Telian Empire, there was not a single settlement on my way there. Most of the land I had traversed today was lined with massive trees with impressive canopies. The buds had recently given birth to new spring leaves, and the humid air carried a wonderful scent. Spring also meant the migration of creatures north, some of them I'd prefer not to encounter. At least I was 300 miles north of the Dragon Spine Mountains, the impressive range that separated the northern and southern parts of the continent. Truly horrific creatures dwelled there, dragons among them. Earth Speak continued to be a blessing as I avoided several threats. What I thought might have been a basilisk burrow turned out to be the worst danger of the day. Without my night vision goggles, I would have to sleep in one of the massive trees tonight, as the moonlight wasn't going to penetrate the spring canopy enough to allow me to continue my flight. The bark of my selected tree resembled wrinkled skin, as I climbed a trunk easily as wide as two prone men. The first decent-sized branch was 50 feet off the ground. A perturbed dark blue bird nesting nearby warbled loudly at me. It was going to draw attention, and I considered killing it, but it soon settled down and graciously decided to share the branch with me once I didn't threaten its nest. I tied a safety line to the branch in case I fell during the night, and sprinkled some myconid powder below. The spring crickets began their song as the sun faded. I ate a hot burrito and checked the blood compass. The pull was still faint, so I was still a fair distance from Corvus. I needed to think of my own counters to the hounds tracking me. The undershirt I'd been wearing had been soaked in blood from my neck wound. I took out a glass alchemy jar, removed the shirt, sprinkled it with generic alchemical preservation powder, and sealed it inside. Then, I wedged the jar into the fork of the tree. As long as the jar remained sealed, it should keep the blood viable for a month, confusing anyone trying to track me with a blood compass. It wouldn't be the only false trail I planned to leave. I pulled on one of my long-sleeved black spider silk shirts. It stretched like spandex and was more comfortable than the standard Hound issue anyway. After I was certain Xina would not be contacting me tonight, I pressed the anchor stone under my armor. I had hoped, with events unfolding so rapidly, that I would have received a message from her by now. I settled in for a long night. The first disturbance was the thundering of a herd of centaurs hunting a lone elk. The chase passed a distance from my perch, but the shadowy silhouettes matched my guess. Centaurs had good night vision, so I wasn't surprised by their nighttime hunt, only glad I wasn't their quarry. The second disturbance was a lumbering tortoise. At least, that's what the shadow looked like from 100 yards away. It didn't match any creature I had studied under Hearn or read about in my bestiaries. The night owls had an animated conversation across the woods. My own feathery bed partner huddled tightly, guarding her clutch. Morning couldn't come soon enough. I thought I might take a side trip to check out one of the hound caches. I lamented the loss of the night vision goggles. Maybe the cache would have a pair. I briefly entered my dreamscape to overlay the map Corvus had shown me with the cache locations. The cache he probably went to was near the first river I intended to cross. Unfortunately, the map lacked many terrain features, and I was unfamiliar with the region. Once I reached the river, I'd need to cross it, follow it east, and hope to stumble across the cache. Then again, he might have been lying when he claimed it was near a forked tree. I thanked my host for the accommodations, descended, and continued northeast at first light. I paused briefly where the centaurs had passed to inspect their tracks. By my count, there were 7 heading south the opposite direction from where I was going. I continued at a brisk pace, and just after midday, I swore. The heavy forest suddenly ended, revealing vast plains spread out before me. If I continued in this direction, I'd be traveling in the open. I studied my map and guessed the river crossing was about 60 or so miles away. The terrain type wasn't clearly marked on my hound map. Rivers, mountains, roads, and settlementses. But how far would I have to travel in the open? Would I have any cover at night? If these were open plains, then the primary predators were bullets, axebeaks, wolves, boars, and centaurs. According to Hearn, I could handle 1 or 2. But if I were outnumbered, I would be in serious trouble with nowhere to hide. I considered trying to convince one of my passengers to help. After all, it wasn't fair they were getting a free ride. Only the first citizen mage might be useful, but she probably couldn't keep up with my pace. I stared at the grasslands ahead, indecisive. The spring grass was just starting to grow. There was nowhere to hide, and only a twisted leafless tree appeared every few hundred yards. I sighed and started a quick tempo jog with long strides, checking the skies intermittently. The danger in these wilds could come from both above and below, and I no longer had the cover of the trees. I started to ration earth speak, and only pulsed it when something looked suspicious to conserve ether. For much of the run, the only dangers were irate prairie dogs. The lack of a real threat unnerved me even more. I only stopped to drink, and when the sun began to fade, I excavated a hole to spend the night in. The rich, rock-free soil would likely make excellent farmland, and the earth-speak pulses had revealed ancient structures long buried with time, hinting that these lands had once been cultivated. There were too many flying predators at night to risk continuing. I felt vulnerable on the plains and didn't sleep at all. Neptune's tear was exceedingly bright tonight, and it felt like it was spotlighting me. A muffled voice sent a surge of adrenaline through me. It took a moment to realize it was the anchor stone and not a threat. I pulled it from the crook in my armor. Xina's voice echoed softly from the air around the stone. I had missed the beginning of the message, but caught a few words. Finds you safe. I miss your touch, and the care you gave to me. Centurion Sergius just informed me you were being assigned to Varvo's defense. Be wary of the dangers the orc clerics pose. It is with sorrow I tell you mage aspirant Livia has been lost to us. Her entire expedition perished while being escorted through the Dragonspine Mountains by one of Centurion Sergius' hounds. The situation in the Eastern Empire is tenuous. I have engaged the Ezenham Elves at the Emperor's side, and we are now moving south to confront the Barteradian army that has crossed the border. Your old mage commander is with us. It is expected to be a bloody conflict. I will not be able to send another message anytime soon. If we never reunite, take care of yourself." The soft hum in the air went silent as the message ended, and I cursed that it was only one-way communication. My blood had chilled as I listened. Livia's face flashed in my mind, her lively green eyes, as she wolfed down a monstrous portion I had cooked for her. Livia was dead, innocent young woman used for her gifts by the Empire. Her smiling face would no longer grace this world. No chance for a normal life or a family. The mission had been orchestrated by Antonia, but it was to gain military support for the Emperor. My anger flared at the injustice. When my temper cooled, I considered the rest of the message. It was clear Zaina had been cautious with her words in case someone was listening. Gora, if my anchor stone had been stolen. Her voice had come through as clearly as if she were standing beside me. She had alluded to a romantic connection between us as cover, but it was her intonations that carried the real message. I was certain the attempt on the Emperor's life would happen during this next battle. I believed her final words advised me to abandon my mission and flee the Empire. But she didn't know how close I was to the archives. I slept in short bursts, disturbed and angry. When morning came, I welcomed it and continued on my determined course. The least I could do for Castile was try to infiltrate the archives and destroy her sample. When I reached the muddy banks of the wide river, I decided to burn a large amount of aether to create air shields, to cross rather than swim. The river looked shallow, and I quickly found a narrow crossing of just 50 yards. Once on the other side, I guessed the hound cache would be east. I followed the river for a few miles before giving up. My blood compass was pointing more north than east. I'd only seen bushes growing along the shore, not a single forked tree. If the hound caches existed, I'd have better luck finding one closer to a city with more landmarks to triangulate their position with the map. I noticed structures in the distance and confirmed on my map there were no Telian settlements this far out. Through the spyglass, the buildings appeared dilapidated. There was no smoke, so I gave the ruins a wide berth and continued along my path. My luck finally ended late in the day. I noticed distant movement, a shark-like dorsal fin parting the earth and heading toward me, a land shark commonly known as a bullet. The first time I encountered one, I gutted it using my dimensional space. This time, I only had a corner of space available to slay it. The only good news, if you could call it that, was that it appeared smaller than the one that had nearly taken my life over a year ago. I chuckled, remembering Hearn's lecture on these monsters. Run. Don't engage, just run, and don't be the slowest man in the group. Their exoskeleton was impervious to normal weapons. Their jaws could bite through metal, they could burrow faster than a man could run, and they could leap 40 feet into the air. I'd seen it before but thought it had only cleared 20. If it didn't leap, I'd never get a clear pulse or use my dimensional space. I sprinted perpendicular to its approach. It slowly veered toward me, confirming I was the target. Although Hearn said you couldn't outrun one, I was going to try and lure it out of the ground. My boots pounded the grass as I ran. I was slightly surprised it didn't seem to be closing. Maybe I was outrunning it. Its fin appeared slightly smaller when I craned my neck. It was hopeful thinking, but maybe I could fatigue the bullet, and it would give up its pursuit. Of course, after 40 minutes of running recklessly in the open, I attracted the attention of a pair of aurochs, monstrous buffaloes. Aurochs were domesticated by the Telians for their hides to use in legion armor, among other things. Their meat was also a common staple of the diet of nobles. These two gave me a glare. They might have thought I was challenging them in their territory. Hearn had said if you left these herbivores alone, they generally left you alone. I ran straight toward the larger one. It accepted the challenge and charged after a loud snort. It was still confused when I used an air shield to vault over it, then the bullet reached it. The explosive emergence of the bullets scared the other auroch into flight. The aggressive bull stood no match for the bullet as its jaws closed on its haunches, gorily cutting off the hindquarters in one bite. I couldn't be sure the bullet wouldn't pursue me after its entree, so I raced back while its back was turned, and it was gorging on the now silent auroch. My dimensional space overlaid with the head, and I relaxed when the behemoth's legs gave out. My heart quickly settled to a calm rhythm, and soon the collector was out, drawing the beast's ether to form a major earth essence. The auroch had been mostly consumed, and the collector failed to draw anything from it. I immediately consumed the earth essence, the chalky taste dissolving in my mouth. I noted it marginally increased the range of my earth-speak pulses. I rested, rehydrating as I sent thanks to Fortuna for placing the aurochs in my path. Soon after, I returned to following the compass. The next 3 days proved much less exciting as I made my way northeast. Some oversized birds of prey circled me for a time. 5 men were riding horses west, who did not appear to be hounds or legionnaires with the spyglass. I passed the ruins of a fort where the stone blocks appeared to be fused together with magic, and I was trailed for a day by a pack of 5 normal wolves, who wisely found easier prey. Finally, I reached a well-worn road of packed earth cutting across the plains. I was fairly certain that this road heading southeast would lead to Vartaholm. I didn't know much about the city other than it had a dungeon and was relatively isolated. If I took the road northwest, it should lead to the city of Ogala. The blood compass pulled northeast, stronger than before. Corvus was likely in the city of Sagrin, less than 50 miles away. I removed the last of my hound armor, dressed in the common clothes I had received in training, and started walking toward Ogala. I could really use a bath before finding Corvus and Sagrin. I passed many farms that were beginning their spring planting and didn't receive many curious looks. The road from Vartaholm that I was on was likely well-traveled. Ogala, like many cities in the Telian Empire, had its own personality from once being part of a kingdom that the First Legion had conquered. As I approached, Ogala was much larger than I had expected. A long swath of houses dotted the landscape outside the city walls. These people had not been affected by the summoned hostile weather and monsters and were thriving. The outer city walls were sandstone and under 20 feet in height. I slowed as a number of green soldiers in oversized uniforms drilled outside the walls. The men training them looked over at me suspiciously. I slowly added a strong limp to my gait as I approached, and turned into a small tavern before reaching the city gates. The musk of the working man permeated the small watering hole. 2 old men sat at a table drinking and were the only patrons. I sat at their table and called for an ale. "Can I get an ale for me and my friends?" I asked the barkeep. As the barkeep filled the mugs, the 2 old men nodded thanks. "I'll be your friend for a cup, but my friendship only lasts as long as there's ale in it," one said jokingly. The other man, who was missing most of his teeth and hair, agreed. "Same here. What are you running from?" "The press gang." I had been right. The young men drilling were being pressed into a militia. I shook my head. "No. I shattered my leg 2 years back. Now I'm traveling from city to city for my baron looking for trade opportunities. If I make him enough, he promised to pay for a healer for my leg." I offered a strained but friendly smile. "The famine in the north has been quite profitable for him." The ale arrived, and the first old man downed half his mug in a long, satisfied pull. I paid 3 copper for the drinks and added 3 more for a second round. Not much left here. Most of the crafters who could afford to loaded their wagons and headed north. They say this goblin horde is going to be the worst in a decade. I nodded, at least that confirmed the boys' drilling formations were being prepared for goblins and not sent to fight the Bardaradians, elves, or orcs. The ale tasted like warm piss, and I put down my mug, hiding my distaste. "Any news of the war?" Hiding my distaste. "Have the elves been crushed and the orc armada sunk?" I asked, calling for food for my companions. Based on the ale, I didn't expect the food to be any better, but I wanted to keep them talking. The toothless man answered, "We don't hear much, but I heard the elves landed and haven't advanced an inch on Telian soil. No word of the orcs sailing. Can't see those 2 peoples mixing to fight against the Legion." I nodded, but it appeared my hope for reliable news wasn't going to be fulfilled here. At least I learned about the press gangs in every Empire city to levy men for the numerous war fronts. I accidentally sipped again, and immediately regretted it. "What word of the goblin horde? Has it left the dragon's spine?" I asked. The 2 men looked at each other, deciding who would answer. Our second round was served with oily potatoes and dry steak. The bald one finally replied. "My nephew was up from Vartaholm last week. Told my brother the Emperor hasn't sent a single mage company to reinforce the city. Just child mages who probably haven't even had their first fuck." There was some vehemence in his voice. "The last time they ignored the horde threat, 10,000 people died." I sat back and nodded in agreement. Flavius had told me his family had died during the goblin surge from the endless dark. I guessed news would reach Ogala soon about the orcs attacking Varveo. I left a large copper for the food on the table as I stood. The toothless man gave me some advice as I left. Make sure you mention to any guards which baron you work for. Any boy or man with idle hands is being fitted with a cuirass and handed a spear and shield. I nodded in thanks, though calling the armor those boys were wearing a cuirass was generous. Soft leather vest was more accurate. I maintained my limp as I approached the city walls. The old men were right. When I tried to pass through one of the gates, I was asked 20 questions about my business. To speed things along, I handed the guard captain 4 silver 2 for him, and 1 for each of his men. It got me passage into the city, and I was sure it would cost the same when I exited. Ogala was much livelier than I thought it should be, with the potential of a goblin horde nearby. Then again, Vartaholm was a buffer between them and here. The normal bustle of city folk rushing about was present. I passed the local Legion Hall and through the doors spotted only a handful of legionnaires. There were so few that there might not even be a company mage stationed here. In the city squares, more militia were being drilled. Some of the boys struggled to hold the heavy, reinforced body shield and wield a spear in the other hand. I reached the upper citadel, though calling it upper was a misnomer, as the entire city sat on flat land. It was the wealthier district, home to the better bathhouses, which was why I was here. I selected a private bathhouse, paid my silver, and luxuriated for an hour, before dressing and securing a room at one of the better inns. I ate dinner in the common room of Vestas Respite, and listened to conversations. I was surprised to hear no one talking about the orc fleet. I figured the rumor mill of the upper city would have heard something by now. When I left the orc armada 6 days ago, they were only a day's sail from Varvo. The attack must have already begun. The news about the elves was less filtered. Rumors flew about the Emperor riding out to meet their advance claims of cities being taken, others insisting they weren't. If Zaina's message was accurate, then the elves had been thwarted for the moment. Near Maca, Duke Tiberius was said to be in pitched battle with the Bartaradians daily. He should have been reinforcing Varval by now, or so Centurion Sergius had told me. The fog of war might be reserved for the battlefield, but it permeated the rumor mill too. I made my way to my room and slept 3 hours to get a full rest before dropping out the window, scaling the outer wall, and landing with the aid of a pair of air shields. I decided I didn't want to risk being pressed into the militia. Been there, done that. In an old barn north of the city, I paused and soaked a sock in my blood, sealed it in a jar with preservation powder, and buried it in a compost pile. Another distraction in case the hounds decided to track me. I figured they had more important things to do than confirm I was dead. I planned to be out of the Empire with Maveth before the war settled. If Zaina and Castile succeeded and the Emperor was slain, no one should care that I was gone. The main road to Sagran went north, then west. There was a less traveled road that headed northeast, directly to the city. The blood compass told me I was closing in on Corvus' location, so I took the quieter road at night. Cultivated farmland lined the path as I walked alone, my sandals crunching on the stones. We'd practiced some disguise skills in hound training, but most were useless in my present circumstances. If I tried to look like a beggar or plebeian, I risked being swept up by the press gangs. The farms remained a fixture all the way to Sagran, which I reached after midday. An army cavalry unit was drilling outside the city walls. From a distance, I could tell most of the horses weren't battle-trained. They didn't trust their riders and were skittish at loud noises. I began to worry that Ginger may have been conscripted back into the Legion. Sagran had an ancient feel. Weathered stone buildings jutted above the walls, embellished with gargoyles. The city was much smaller than Ogala, maybe 10,000 people. The pull on the blood compass strengthened with every step. 2 guards questioned everyone entering the city. "Ears," one barked at me. "Ears," he repeated impatiently. "Remove your hat," I complied, guessing they were looking for elves. He brushed aside my hair with a foul-smelling hand to check more closely. Perhaps checking to see if there was an illusion and I was an elf? "Name and your business in Ogala?" "Lucian Paulos," I said, using the old horsemaster's name. "I'm returning to Lorvo after completing trade business in Vartaholm for my baron." He frowned. "You're traveling alone?" Yes, it was true no one traveled alone in the Empire, but I was ready. "My trade caravan is headed to Aganta, and will pass through here on the way back to Lorvo. They should arrive in 3 days. I wanted time to partake of your local offerings." I gave a hedonistic smile. "Where's the best place to stay in Sagran for such?" Proclivities, I said, handing him a silver. He grunted, palming it. Heard the selection at the affable lips has expanded recently. Some comely refugees. Too pricey for me, though. I nodded enthusiastically. The guards moved aside without ever asking my baron's name. I could imagine Adrian scolding him for doing such a poor job. I tightened my cap and moved into the city. It was easy to tell where the wealthier parts were by the flow of people. My hand gripped the compass, and unsurprisingly, it pulled me toward the citadel. I had thought the secret archives would be in the middle of the woods or just anywhere more remote, not in one of the Empire's cities. As I approached the citadel, the compass started turning in my hands. The pull grew stronger, but not toward the citadel. I was confused as I fumbled with it in my pocket. Then I realized the compass was pointing down. I pretended to scratch my foot, briefly removing my sandal to place my bare foot on the stone paver. I expected to find Corvus sloshing through the sewers. Instead, the earth pulse returned a maze of deep tunnels under the city just beneath the simple sewer system. I was shocked by the extent, nearly 50 feet down, thanks to the bullet earth essence. What I saw was just the upper levels of something much more vast and ancient construction by the feel of it. Something that had rested undisturbed for hundreds of years. I began mapping the upper levels of the tunnels as I moved around the upper city, looking for an access point. Many tunnels had been sealed where they accessed cellars. I finally found an open one in a small shrine dedicated to Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage. The Tellians didn't truly worship the old Roman gods, but it was common to have small temples and shrines where people could ask for favors from a divine aspect. I found a tavern within sight of the shrine and ordered an early dinner. While I ate, I watched the temple closely. A couple entered to have their marriage blessed, or maybe their coupling for the evening, hoping for a child. A desperate man rushed in crying and soon exited, still distraught. Then, an acolyte of Juno entered. Even beneath his off-blue robes, I could tell by his stride and the muscles in his neck that he was a warrior, not an acolyte. I left my half-finished dinner to walk by the shrine and leaned against the outer wall. The acolyte spoke with another inside before continuing further in. I tracked him with pulses as he entered a secret room and descended a staircase, quickly dropping beyond the range of my earth speak. Corvus was still beneath me, and I was fairly certain I had found the second archives. I remained leaning against the outer wall of the shrine to Juno for an hour. Loitering was normal in cities, and I made a show of being indecisive about entering the temple. 3 more people came in to donate silver and request a blessing from the acolyte, but no one came up the secret stairs. With evening approaching and rain likely, I headed for one of the 2 inns in the upper city. I passed on the affable lips in favor of an inn called the Eagle's Nest. I told the keeper the same story I told the guards. I was waiting for my trade caravan to catch up with me after they diverted to another town to pick up goods. The room was nice, if a bit expensive. It was on the 3rd floor and had rare glass windows overlooking the upper city, with a private balcony that faced one of the larger squares. After securing the windows and doors, I lay in bed and thought about getting into the archives. Getting in wasn't the issue. I could create my own access and move into the subterranean network. Destroying the blood samples was going to be difficult without getting caught. If any of the hound guards spotted me, I'd have to kill them. I didn't see any way around it. Hopefully, they thought I was already dead, but even disguised, I couldn't risk the Empire knowing it was me. I lay there, turning over the moral dilemma in my mind. I assumed as many as 6 hounds were stationed here, including Corvus. If they were Centurion Sergius' loyal men, they probably lacked morality anyway. And didn't Zina say one of Sergius's hounds got Livia killed? Was that a veiled warning not to trust Sergius? My moral compass shifted to assuage any guilt I might have for what needed to be done. I took out the last non-affinity essence in my space, having already consumed the strength, coordination, and endurance essences on my trek here. I tossed the pink apex empathy essence in the air, over and over, mesmerized by how the glowstone light reflected off the sphere. I was reluctant to consume this one. Would it enhance my already troubled conscience? I had grown up being relatively selfish, and all my serious girlfriends confirmed this when we inevitably broke up with me. I nimbly rolled the ball across the back of my fingers and sighed as I placed it into my mouth. It dissolved, spreading a sticky sweetness down my throat and into my brain. My face went flush, and my thoughts muddied for a short while. When the essence completed its work, I had hoped it would somehow change my mind and pull me from my path. Konstantin had advised me to burn it all down. Zina had hinted I should forget the task and just flee. I didn't understand the underlying politics, other than that the archives were Damocles' sword the Emperor held over the powerful first citizens and mages. The blood could be used in ritual magic to target an individual or given to a hound to track you anywhere. The essence did not sway me from my chosen path. I was still committed, and most likely fated to kill at least some of the hounds guarding the archives. I didn't sleep well that night, tossing and turning in short bursts of sporadic sleep and vague nightmares of being drowned in blood and hunted across all of Dazia. I should have used an oblivion pill or the amulet, but that felt like cheating, avoiding my moral ambiguity. I rode out my sweaty, incremental sleep. I had a small breakfast in the common room before walking through the city to look for other access points to the tunnels beneath it. The walled city was only about a square mile, but the deep network extended far beyond, even outside the walls, though most of the deeper passages were sealed. I guess the city housed 10,000 people, with twice that number living outside the gates. I spotted a few legionnaires but no legion mages as I explored the shops, pretending to browse while using my Earthspeak ability. The other interesting thing I discovered was a second entrance guarded by an unremarkable man I assumed to be a hound. Near the east gate, there was a barber shop, and at the back, I found a secret door in the floor that led to a ladder accessing the tunnels. The only areas of the city I had been unable to explore with my Earthspeak pulses were the Citadel and some of the large first citizen villas outside my spellform's range. My exploration also helped me formulate a plan to access the tunnels. An old woman who ran a general goods store in the lower city happened to have a large number of lamp oil casks in stock. She also had one of the access points to the network beneath the city in her deep cellar. 10 feet of solid stone blocked the access, but I figured I could clear it in time. The plan was simple. Break in, take the casks, enter the deep tunnels, locate the archives, and burn everything tonight. Late in the day I sat eating noodles with diced vegetables when 6 small blocks of soldiers marched through the streets as a light, cold rain began to fall. They were guarding 6 of the Emperor's heralds. It was clear they were here to disseminate important news. I raced back to my room to listen from the safety of my balcony in case their announcement caused a mob to form. Heralds were used to spread news of the Empire in plazas, and thousands of citizens squeezed together while 25 soldiers protected each assigned herald. The fact that they weren't guarded by legionnaires but regular soldiers was noteworthy, indicating a strain on resources. Curious about the news, I leaned over my balcony to listen. The blonde-haired, well-groomed herald was patient as he waited for the crowd to grow. I assumed this same scene was playing out at 5 other locations across the city or just beyond the gates. When he felt the crowd was sufficient, his voice boomed, amplified by a spell form or artifact silencing everyone. Citizens of the Telhaian Empire, I bring you news of the war in the east against the malicious Barteradians, the deceitful elves of Essenham, and the devilish orcs of the Bhutan Caliphate. His words hushed the crowd as everyone strained to hear. Know that your emperor, Maximus Augustus Severus, High Mage of the Void, Shield and Sword of the majestic Tellian Empire, has successfully stopped the Essenham elves' advancement on Karenhagen, and he has personally slain 2 of the ancient elven high mages on the field of battle. The crowd stirred at his words, murmurs growing, but no one cheered. With a more resigned tone, he continued, Unfortunately, Duke Tiberius has failed to stem the endless tide of cursed Barteradians across the eastern border. And as of yesterday morning, the army of the Supreme Cleric of the Bhutan Caliphate, led by their greatest warlords, has assaulted the great Tellian city of Vava. Murmurs erupted, growing in volume. The crowd was stunned for a moment, then dozens of voices burst out. As the questions mounted, the herald raised his voice to continue over the din. The Emperor is calling on every able-bodied citizen to join the effort to defend your empire and emperor. What about the goblin horde? Someone shouted above the chaos. I backed away from the balcony, sensing the anger rising below. The Imperial Herald ignored the question and continued his script. Any able-bodied man will be given 50 silvers immediately upon joining the army, in addition to 3 silver a week. This caused a ripple through the crowd. Young men not yet conscripted suddenly saw a way to leave their families a substantial sum. I doubted they would ever see the 3 silver a week, at least not until the campaign ended. if they even survived. I retreated from the balcony and locked the doors. I doubted the orcs had just reached Varval yesterday. The armada I had tried to slow only had to sail 50 miles after I fled, and that was 5 days ago. I almost risked taking out and reading the message book, but resisted the temptation in case Centurion Sergius could track it. The discontented crowd continued to pepper the herald while he pressed on, offering incentives for skilled soldiers and craftsmen. I changed into dark clothes, swapped out my sandals for earth drake boots, donned my black manticore cloak, belted on the magebane, and waited anxiously for dark. A few hours after sunset, I slipped unseen out the back of the eagle's nest and made my way through the streets. The rain had intensified, heavy drops echoing on my hood. The press gangs didn't patrol the upper city, and even if they did, I expected they'd give the young men a few days to volunteer and claim the bonus rather than be conscripted with nothing. The streets were quiet in the somber city. I soon reached the alley behind the general store. The old woman lived above it. I removed the lock and opened the door as quietly as possible, slipped in and shut it behind me. My cloak dripped on the floor, but the heavy rain masked the noise. Without night goggles, I had little light, so I felt my way to the small lamp oil casks and took all 9 each, about 5 gallons. I placed a full gold coin on the shelf, more than twice their value. The stairs to the basement were stone, and I risked pulling out a glowstone after shutting the door behind me. My earth speak returned only a cat, perched atop some shelves, its yellow eyes studying me. Everything was coated in dustinly cat prints marked the floor. I approached the cream-colored cat, which soon pressed its head into my hand, eager for attention. "Good kitty, not a single rat on your watch. Just do me a favor and remain quiet while I work," I said as its purring grew louder. "I bet you're hungry for both attention and food." I placed a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon on the floor for the skinny feline, who attacked it ferociously, its grinding purr somehow playing through its mouth as it engulfed the offering. It was one less breakfast I had prepared, but the cat needed it more than I did. I moved to the back wall, and the cat followed after finishing its meal, using my legs as a rubbing post. I searched again with Earthspeak and confirmed this led to the sealed network of passages. I created a narrow 2-foot-wide passage, 4 feet in height, moving the stone into my dimensional space and then to the rarely used basement storeroom. When the final stone was removed, stale air rushed out of the tunnels, and the door to the cellar rattled from the pressure change. I hadn't traced any of the narrow air shafts I had come across in the city, but it was obvious some were still functioning, pulling air into the network of passages. My heart raced as I covered the glowstone and listened. I didn't want to seal the tunnel behind me in case I needed a quick escape. I listened for a few minutes, confirming the shop owner was not coming down to check on the noise. The noisy rain was now a blessing. I entered the passage and the cat dashed into the tunnels, probably searching for prey. I just hoped it wouldn't get itself killed. When I explored the city depths yesterday with my Earthspeak pulses, I'd noticed a few slimes and large rats in the sewers. These tunnels below the sewers had only a few monstrous rats. The walls of the tunnels were solid stone, no seams indicating they may have been carved out by hand or magic. Only rat prints dotted the dusty floor. No one had come this way in a long time. I was surprised no water had permeated these tunnels from the sewers above. The walls, floors, and ceiling were limestone, and the maze of passages seemed to go on endlessly. As I descended a sloped passage, I was soon out of range of the streets above. The layers of passages seemed to extend deeper and deeper, with no end in sight, and large empty rooms further below. The whole complex started to remind me of an ant colony. Navigating the passages was markedly easier with Earthspeak, which allowed me to map a large section at a time. I moved toward the upper city and the access point the hounds used in the shrine. The only obstacle I encountered was a thick iron gate blocking access to that area. The lock was well oiled, but I didn't need a key. The entire lock disappeared. I started to move more cautiously, as tracks from men were now evident in the dust. I finally found a chamber deep below with life. A large room appeared to have beds and living accommodations. I detected only 2 men inside, both sleeping, but there were 24 beds, which gave me pause. I figured the room for the hounds would be close to the archives, and searched for a way to descend to the inhabited room. I had to circle back twice in the maze of tunnels before I found the stairs the hounds had been using. These corridors were free of dust, and I got spooked when the old woman's cat trotted up and dropped a large wrath off its size 8 my feet. I bent down and praised the hunter. "You should go home with your prize. Things are going to get messy soon." It ignored my advice and just purred while I scratched its ears. I wasn't going to bottom out my either to store the felony. It was free to make its own decisions. The stairs corkscrewed down, and from the brightness of the limestone steps, these stairs were much newer than the rest of the complex. I no longer needed my glowstone, as the walls had their own stones at intervals. But I was pulsing Earth Speak more frequently as I descended. Earth Speak revealed a hound at the bottom of the stairs long before he could see me, and I had no way to avoid him. I could retreat and look for a different access to these lower levels, but I had already been in the underground network for over 2 hours. While I contemplated my next action, my feline friend darted down the stairs ahead of me, and I heard the hound draw his sword. I heard a clang of metal on stone, and thought the cat had stumbled into an early grave. I rushed down the stairs, drawing my blade and pushing ether into it. I found the hound half-turned, facing off with the hissing cat, and waiting for a second chance to strike. I didn't recognize this hound, but when he saw me, he reached for a whistle around his neck. I lunged forward with my blade. He defended with his own weapon, but an air shield prevented him from parrying the Magebane blade as I drove it into his sternum. I saw the confusion in his eyes as he tried to reach for Aether to use whatever spell form he had imprinted. I angled the short sword to destroy his heart and extracted it, lowering him softly to the floor. The cat had forced my hand, and I tossed it a sour look. I had placed a cat's life above that of a hound of the Empire. I was fully and truly a traitor now. Strangely, I didn't feel the weight of guilt I had expected. The cat returned, unperturbed, and began to lick up the pooling blood. I pulsed Earth Speak again, and found no one in range before retrieving the collector. I searched his body as the collector worked. A lesser pale orange essence formed a reasoning attribute, if I remembered correctly. I pocketed it. He had nothing else useful, no hound artifact or other items of note. I dragged his body down the corridor out of sight. The pool of blood at the watchpost was obvious, so I outlined the area with my space and removed the thin layer of blood and dirt. The cat spun in place, confused about what had happened to its meal. I found the primary corridor leading to the large room where the 2 hounds slept, but if possible, I would avoid adding any more unnecessary deaths. Moving quickly and quietly, I traveled down the corridor to a heavy door. I moved down a side corridor and claimed a block of stone that fit in the archway of the door. The block was a foot thick and blocked the door from opening. I frowned. It used up over half my aether due to the mass. I then cut the stone into smaller blocks so as not to leave evidence someone had moved something that massive. I turned away, and at least the heavily traveled corridors were easy to follow. I descended further, and found the number of chambers increased the deeper I went. These lower side passages had been walled off like the city access points above. One of the sealed chambers contained a large number of bipedal exoskeletons, arrayed in a circular pattern. They appeared to be some insectoid race, suggesting the Tellians had not excavated this underground network, but instead killed the prior residents, or claimed it after they died out. Figuring out that mystery wasn't part of my purpose, I followed the heavily trodden path, the moronic cat plodding happily beside me like it was my partner in crime. The glowstone sconces led me to the largest chamber I had come across so far. It was half the size of a football pitch, had dozens of glowstones keeping it brightly lit, and held rows upon rows of tall shelves. Small glass jars lined the shelves as far as I could see. In the brightly lit room, I caught movement among the racks and retreated back into the corridor. A familiar voice echoed across the chamber, and I didn't need to hold the blood compass to know I had found Corvus. His irritated voice carried. "Is that you, Appius? Come help me find jar number 11,069. Someone must have misplaced it, and it needs to be sent to the capital in the morning." There was no turning back. He had been spotted. I made sure no other hounds were moving about in the massive chamber before stepping into it. I walked casually and unthreateningly toward Corvus, who was cursing as he searched. I passed a desk with a colossal tome that looked to be a catalog of the blood samples and their locations. Before I reached Corvus, I heard him swear. "What in Pluto's cock is a cat doing in here?" He looked up from my accomplice and noticed me. I was close enough he could see me clearly now. There was no turning back now. He was shocked and seemed to stutter. "Yerrick? I thought you were dead," I replied calmly, forcing a friendly smile. People often make that mistake.